Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. Today we will see what if Naruto was neglected by his family Apollo Uchiha. If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. I suppose an introduction is in order. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. I'm 12 years old with sunny blonde hair and sky blue eyes. I was born in Tokyo, Japan, but thanks to my dad, my mom and I were able to become American citizens and now we live in New York, New York. Now, a lot of you are about to ask who my dad is and what makes him so special that he could get my mother and I to become American citizens so quickly. To tell you the truth, I don't know. I never knew my dad, or rather, I never met him before. My mom, Kushina Uzumaki, always told me that he was a kind, good-looking man who always traveled on business trips that kept him away from us for long periods of time. Whenever I bring him up when I get curious about him, she would laugh and call him a flirtatious, womanizing flake with no aptitude for poetry. I'd always laugh because I know she loved him even after saying all those mean things about him. When she looked at me, she would say I reminded her of him. Same hair, same eyes, her little ball of sunshine. That was her nickname for me when I was little. She taught me how to fight, just in case I was ever bullied in school. She was actually really cool like that. She taught me a lot of things growing up that I didn't quite understand her reasoning for, but I went with it, if only to see her smile. She took me to martial arts class after I accidentally beat the living hell out of a kid for picking on one of my friends named Grover Underwood because he was helpless and a cripple. Needless to say, I was the best in my class. After the 3rd grade, Mom hired a private tutor to teach me how to play the violin and guitar. Again, somehow, my teacher said I took to music like a fish took to water and after a few lessons, said I would only need experience in order to become a member of a famous orchestra like the New York Philharmonic. Don't ask me how a single mother of one could afford to send her son to martial arts classes and hire a private tutor in New York, afford to live in a studio apartment, and send him to a boarding school while working for the Department of Transportation. I think my dad may have left her a small fortune before having to leave us for his business. At least, I would like to think he cared that much about our welfare. Today, I'm on a field trip to the Metropolitan Museum of Art for Mr. Brunner's 6th grade Latin class with Mrs. Dodds, our math teacher at Yancey Academy, as the chaperone. Grover Underwood and I were hanging out with our other friend, Percy Jackson as Mr. Brunner, the wheelchair-bound teacher, began lectures about the various pieces of art as we passed them by. However, I quickly noticed that our next destination was the Greek mythology display. I couldn't keep my excitement in check as we entered the room. It was midday when a group of chattering, noisy children led by 2 teachers. One, Mr. Brunner, a Caucasian teacher bound to a wheelchair with thick, wavy brown hair and matching beard, was trying his hardest to explain to the class about certain artifacts while the other, Mrs. Dodds, a wrinkly old woman wearing clothes that reminded everyone of the things grandmothers wore in the 60s with a purse to match, seemed to glare intensely at Percy Jackson, one of the only 3 students trying to pay attention to Mr. Brunner's lecture. Beside Percy Jackson were his 2 best friends, Grover Underwood, a young African-American boy with curly brown hair and what looked like a soul patch that gave him an appearance that he was older than his record stated, who was walking on a pair of steel crutches to his right, while Naruto Uzumaki, a young boy who was admittedly short for his age at a measly 4 feet 8 inches tall with bright golden blonde hair and eyes so blue they looked like they were crafted right out of the clear blue sky, was on his left. Naruto often stuck up for Percy and Grover when it came to bullies, like one Nancy Bobofit. Nancy Bobofit is many things. Good-looking, to her friends. Perfect, to her friends, parents, and every teacher in the school save Mr. Brunner. But there was one thing that only Naruto, Percy, and Grover agreed on. Nancy Bobofit was a grade A bitch. She would always pick on Grover out of the 3 because he was least likely to break your face or fight back and most likely to cry if you picked on him enough. It was as she was launching peanut butter and ketchup wads at Grover's curly hair that Naruto had enough. He calmly walked over with an overly sweet smile on his face, ripped the sandwich and packets of ketchup from Nancy's hands, and threw it in the trash before spitting a massive loogie on it to prevent her, or anyone else, from willingly picking it up. If you throw one more thing at Grover, I'll turn you into one of these exhibits, Bobofit, he said, causing the girl and her red hair to pale several shades before going back to his friends. Thanks for that, Grover said with a sad tone to his voice before Naruto gave him a noogie, dislodging any more of the brown and red lunch from his hair before patting him on the back with a brilliant smile that could blind anyone who looked at it. "It's all good, Grover," he said reassuringly. "We've known each other for a while now. I'll always have your back." Grover smiled brightly in response. Something about Naruto just made you want to smile and look at the world in the best light possible. Like you couldn't avoid being his friend. He was incredibly charismatic when he needed to be and incredibly violent when he wanted to be or when someone was dumb enough to threaten his friends. As they made their way into the Greek exhibits, Mr. Brunner had just gotten through grilling Percy about the story of the Titanomachy started, how Zeus and the first generation of Olympians had defeated their father, Kronos, and the other Titans, with the exception of their mother, Rhea, and cast them down to face their punishments, as well as demigods and how they were born from the relations between the Greek gods and mortals. Kronos had been cut into thousands of pieces and his immortal body scattered throughout Tartarus. Then, Nancy Bobofit made a sarcastic remark about how knowing about how Kronos ate his kids and started the war between titans and gods would matter in real life. Well, Mr. Uzumaki, how would, to paraphrase Ms. Bobofit's question, this information be useful in real life, Mr. Brunner asked. Naruto looked pensive for a moment before saying something he had no idea why he said in the first place. Well, there are no stories about how the gods died, so one can only assume that they still live and continue to give birth to new demigods, even in this day and age. For all we know, the person or people standing right next to us could be demigods, for all we know. Mr. Brunner and Grover looked at him with analytical eyes, but he chuckled, as if recalling a joke to himself. But that's just wishful thinking, I suppose. If we were to go to Greece and try to get a job in a museum or as archaeologists, the information and knowledge would help us, but outside of that, I can't think of much else. Indeed, Mr. Brunner said carefully. Anyway, a full credit to Mr. Jackson and Mr. Uzumaki. Now, seeing as it is almost noon, Ms. Dodd will escort you all to the pavilion to eat your lunches. Percy and Grover were about to leave when they saw Naruto staring at one of the statues in the corner. Turning around, Naruto gave them a soft smile and waved them off before walking closer to the statue. He didn't know how long he'd been staring at it, just that he felt some kind of connection to it. That statue is of Apollo, the Greek god of the sun, music, poetry, and medicine, you know, called Mr. Brunner from behind him, startling the young boy slightly. I know. Do you feel some kind of connection to that statue? Mr. Brunner pressed. Naruto chuckled to himself. Nah, it's just, he seems kinda flaky to me. Mr. Brunner waited for something to happen, but the only thing he noticed was that the sun shone a bit brighter. I see, he said calmly. I believe Mr. Jackson and Mr. Underwood are waiting for you in the cafeteria. Wouldn't want to keep them waiting. Naruto walked back to his friends without another look back at the statue. As soon as they sat down, Naruto pulled out what had to be the strangest lunch ever created. It was a miso-flavored ramen sandwich with jalapeno ranch mayo and provolone cheese on whole wheat bread. Without hesitation, Naruto quickly dug into his sandwich with gusto that not even Percy or Grover had seen from anything remotely human. A part of them were disgusted, but another part was intrigued at how Naruto, in spite of eating like a pig, was still a relatively clean eater. The trio were enjoying themselves, often chatting about some random subject or another, when Nancy Bobofit walked over to them, pretended to trip, and tossed her entire lunch in Grover's face. Percy went to stand up, but Grover placed a hand on his shoulder and practically forced him to sit back down. Naruto, on the other hand, had just about enough and reached for one of Grover's crutches while looking the smug bitch directly in the eye, causing her to pale and hightail it to the fountains. I'm going to kill her, Percy growled, causing Naruto to nod in agreement. It's times like these that I hope karma hits her before I do, the blonde said harshly. People like her aren't worth getting worked up about, guys, Grover chimed. That didn't stop Percy and Naruto from glaring at the redhead with every intention on watching something horrible happen to her. Unknown to them, a strange feeling made itself known to the two and without warning, they watched as Nancy screamed, putting her hands over her eyes before something pushed her into the fountain. Several students were gaping at the sight as Nancy stood back up, her clothes thoroughly soaked, before glaring at the three and pointing at them. Mrs. Dodds. Naruto pointed a laser pointer in my eyes and Percy shoved me into the fountain. Karma bites, doesn't it? Naruto called out to Nancy. I wish I could say I did point a laser pointer in your eyes, but I didn't bring one on the trip with me. Unlike you, I was more interested in learning than making the lives of every student on this trip as miserable as possible. And I know for sure that Percy was eating lunch with me and Grover across the building from where you were. So why don't you just tell the truth for once and admit you slipped on a puddle of water rather than blame us for something we couldn't have possibly done? Either Mrs. Dodds didn't hear or didn't care because she immediately pulled the two aside, muttering about being disrespectful on a class field trip and bullying innocent students. For some reason, Mrs. Dodds absolutely loathed Percy and took every chance to make his school year as miserable as Nancy, if not more so since she was the pre-algebra teacher. Once the two were far enough away from the class, Mrs. Dodds spun on them and glared at them as though the look she gave them would immolate them on the spot. "You two have been making trouble for us," she growled out harshly. "Well, ma'am," Percy started before Naruto interrupted him. "We have no freaking idea what the hell you're talking about," Naruto said flatly. "Return what you stole and you will suffer less pain," she screamed, having seemingly disappeared and reappeared atop the scaffolding near one of the exhibits that was being worked on. Time's up. Where Mrs. Dodds once stood, now something reminiscent of nightmares was waiting. Mrs. Dodds had somehow turned into a massive, ugly-looking bat-like creature with talons where her nails once were and thick, leather wings where her jacket used to be. Naruto's and Percy's eyes widened in a combination of shock, awe, and fear as they looked upon the mass of leather and dagger-like talons. "Percy," Naruto asked hesitantly, not taking his eyes off the creature. "Are we dreaming the same dream?" "I don't think we're dreaming at all, Naruto," Percy replied. "Gods damn it," Naruto cried, absently forgetting he said gods instead of God. "She's going to kill us if we don't get the hell out of here." "What ho, boys," called the familiar voice of Mr. Brunner as he waved a bronze pen over his head along with a small bronze ring. "Catch." As the bat creature that was formerly known as Mrs. Dodds' dove, Percy uncapped the pen, watching as it turned into a sword while Naruto put the ring on his right ring finger before watching it turn into a compound bow with a small quiver of 6 arrows. Naruto quickly knocked an arrow and released it into one of the creature's wings while Percy reacted naturally and bifurcated Mrs. Dodds cleanly, only to watch her disappear in a fine golden dust as 2 talons fell to the ground dully. Naruto hurried and picked them both up before pocketing them while Percy tried to regain what felt like the shattered remnants of his sanity. Percy turned quickly toward Naruto, watching as both of their weapons began turning back into the ring and pen respectively. "Did that really just happen?" Percy asked. Naruto nodded. "It had to," the blonde teen replied. "But I think the real question here is, what the hell happened? What did Mrs. Dodds turn into, and how are we still alive after that?" Much to their own chagrin, neither could come up with an answer. It got even weirder when Nancy Bobofit approached them with a nasty smirk dancing on her lips. "I hope Mrs. Kerr whooped your butts." Percy was about to say something when Naruto snorted. "After we showed her that I didn't have a laser pointer on me and Percy was with Grover and I eating lunch, she let us go with a warning. But believe me, you won't be so lucky when karma comes back to chew on your ass some more, you prissy little brat. Your daddy's money may buy you friends at the school and keep you out of trouble, but you will end up in a situation where daddy won't be there to help you and I'll laugh my ass off when that day comes." With that said, the students filed back onto the bus, but not before Mr. Brunner took back the ring and pen and said something. "I see you found my lucky ring, Mr. Uzumaki. Thank you for returning it to me. I've been looking for it everywhere. And as for the return of my pen, Mr. Jackson, please bring your own writing utensil in the future." While Percy was asking around about their former pre-algebra teacher, Mrs. Dodds, and getting looks like he was crazy, Naruto was busy observing their reactions to his constant questions. While almost every student seemed to genuinely not know who Mrs. Dodds was or that she even existed in the first place, Grover clearly knew something he wasn't telling. The same could be said for Mr. Brunner, though he clearly hid his reactions much better than their friend. After days of trying to trip someone up and being told they had a major test coming up, Percy and Naruto were in Percy's dorm room reading their Latin books. Naturally, their dyslexia was severely crippling their attempts at studying, though Percy's growing frustration certainly wasn't helping. Rather, it was making his dyslexia act up even more than usual. Just as the green-eyed boy was about to chuck the book at the wall, Naruto placed a reassuring hand on his friend's shoulder and gave him an understanding smile. I know that the whole Mrs. Dodds trying to kill us, as killing Mrs. Dodds, and nobody even remembering she existed, thing is getting to you. But you have to try and calm down, Naruto said soothingly. The letters just keep jumping off the page and mixing around with one another. I can't even tell you the difference between Chiron and Karen. Chiron is a centaur who was granted immortality to help train the children of the gods and goddesses to become heroes. Karen is the ferryman of the dead who resides in the underworld, Naruto said with a chuckle. If that still confuses you, Chiron the trainer has an I while Karen the ferryman has an A. Percy still looked at him as though he had just grown another head in front of his very eyes. Naruto sighed tiredly. Mr. Brunner is pretty cool about helping his students out. If you want to, I'll go with you to visit him. Alright? Percy nodded and smiled at his friend before the two took off to Mr. Brunner's office. As the duo got closer to the Latin teacher's office, they could hear a familiar voice coming from within the doors. Naruto motioned to just outside of the door's window to overhear the conversation from. Worried about Naruto and Percy, "Sir," came the voice of their friend Grover. Another voice came forth, probably Mr. Brunner, but he was whispering something the two could barely make out. Pressing their ears to the door, they could hear Grover begin to reply again. "Alone this summer. I mean, a kindly one in the school. Now that we know for sure, and they must know something is wrong now. We would only make matters worse by rushing them," Mr. Brunner replied. "They both need time to mature. But they may not have time," Grover said adamantly. "With the summer solstice deadline coming, it will have to be resolved without them," Mr. Brunner stated calmly. "Let them enjoy their ignorance while they still can. They saw her. Their imagination," the Latin teacher reminded him pointedly. "The mist over the students and staff should be enough to convince them of that." "Sir, I can't fail in my duties again," Grover implored to the teacher. "You know what that would mean. You haven't failed in your duties, Grover," Mr. Brunner said reassuringly. "For now, let's worry about keeping Percy and Naruto alive until fall." As soon as Percy heard the part about keeping them both alive, his Latin book slipped through his fingers and landed on the floor, alerting the two in the room to a presence nearby. Naruto picked up the book and dragged Percy up the stairwell, where they flattened against the wall. Once they were sure the teacher and Grover were gone, they hightailed it back to Percy's dorm before shutting the door quickly. Percy looked over at Naruto. His nerves were clearly shaken by the conversation. "What do you think they meant by keep us alive until the fall, Naruto?" The blonde bit his bottom lip anxiously before muttering a small, silent curse. "I don't know, but I don't like being kept in the dark about things that involve my well-being." Naruto swore again under his breath before the tension seemed to ease its way out of his body. "For now, we should just stay alert. Keep an eye out for anything that seems off. Like Nancy Bobofit being nice to you, me, and Grover." Percy chuckled a bit at the joke. He couldn't be more thankful to have a friend like Naruto around. He could put people at ease with a smile and a few kind words. He always spoke his mind and was, though completely unaware of it, the most blunt person you could ever meet. If he thought you were an idiot, he would just up and say it rather than sugarcoat it like others would. For that, Percy often blamed and thanked his mother, depending on the circumstances surrounding his bluntness. "Thanks, Ruto," Percy stated in a calmer tone. "I needed that." Naruto grinned and gave Percy a thumbs up. "No problem, Perce. For now, let's just get back to studying and put this whole deal with Mr. Brunner and those kindly ones on the back burner." The following day, Naruto and Percy walked out of Mr. Brunner's Latin class with frowns on their faces. While Naruto was confident he passed, albeit with a low grade, Percy was complaining about the words looking like alphabet soup when he tried to answer them to the best of his ability. "Mr. Jackson," came the voice of Mr. Brunner from the doorway once the last student had gone to the next class. "Mr. Uzumaki, may I speak with the two of you alone for a moment?" Percy looked hesitant, though that may be because the conversation from last night was still fresh in his mind. Naruto put a reassuring hand on Percy's shoulder as the two walked back into the classroom with the wheelchair-bound teacher with the scruffy brown hair and beard. "What did you want to talk about, Mr. Brunner?" Naruto asked cautiously. "Naruto, Percy," he started, seeming slightly awkward as he tried to pick the best words to use. "Don't be discouraged about having to leave Yancy. It's for the best." Percy looked like he wanted to object, to look offended. Naruto simply sighed in what could only seem like resignation. I understand, Mr. Brunner, Naruto said. What I mean is that this isn't the right place for you. It was only a matter of time, he said. This time, Percy did look offended and Naruto couldn't blame him. Of course, he could hardly blame Mr. Brunner either. He was clearly not the best in the world when it came time to delivering bad news without making it worse. No, Mr. Brunner said angrily at himself. Confound it all. What I'm trying to say is that neither of you are normal. That's nothing to be. Thanks, Percy said abruptly. Thanks a lot, sir, for reminding me. With that said, Percy stormed out the door while Naruto took his hand and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Percy, don't worry about him, Mr. Brunner, Naruto said calmly. I know you were trying your best to make him feel better. Thank you for your patience, Naruto, the teacher said. Naruto frowned slightly. Mr. Brunner, I want you to tell me the truth. You know something about Percy and me. Something you have felt fit to hide from us. At the time, I wanted to believe you were looking out for us, and I appreciate it. More than you know. But I need you to tell me what's going on. Mrs. Dodd's turning into what you call a kindly one. The pen that turned into a sword. The ring that turned into a bow and arrows. Please, tell me the truth. I deserve that much, at least. Mr. Brunner bit his lip and looked Naruto in the eyes before sighing in resignation. Very well, but I won't be able to tell you everything here. He pulled out a business card written in some kind of foreign language, but Naruto was able to read it with ease in spite of never having seen this before in his life. Chiron, trainer of heroes, Half-Blood Hill, Long Island, New York. 800-002-0002. Now, this is where I work over the summer. The answers I can't give you, you can find there, Mr. Brun. I mean, Chiron explained. You and Percy are both demigods, at least, we suspect Percy is. You, however, are definitely one. Who your godly parent is largely unknown. You must wait for them to claim you. Some gods and goddesses claim their children immediately while others sometimes go their entire lives without being claimed. Naruto nodded to himself. He could see that some gods had so many children that they could easily forget more than a few, or that they were so embarrassed by their children that they didn't want them to represent them on any quests. However, for a god or goddess to not claim their child felt the same as simply saying, I never wanted you to be born. It disgusted him greatly to know that the gods sired children and refused to claim them. How do I get to this camp? Naruto asked carefully. Your father should have given the instructions to your mother when they realized she was pregnant with you, but if she hasn't, he said before pulling out a small map in his pocket with a blank forest area by the Long Island Sound circled in red followed by a line that traveled the map from point A, Yancy Academy, to point B, Camp Half-Blood. Then this will help guide you there. I should warn you now, you can either be a year-round camper and stay there permanently, or you could only go during the summer and come home for the other 3 seasons to go to school. It's up to you. Naruto took the map and tucked it away in his pocket. What about Percy? Grover will help get him there, Chiron stated. He has placed himself in charge of Percy's safety and journey to camp. He deserves this chance to prove himself as a capable protector. Naruto looked up at the clock and saw it was getting late. He and Chiron must have been speaking to one another for some time. Well, since I doubt I'll be coming back next year, I'll just go ahead and pack my stuff for home. Get a head start to get ready for camp. Not really much I can do if I'm just barely gonna pass the year, ya know? Chiron nodded. I understand. I look forward to your arrival at camp, Naruto. The boy nodded and left just as the last bell rang. A little bit later, Naruto met back with Percy in his room and already started packing for his trip home. Percy noticed his sunny disposition as he packed and decided to ask a few questions. What's up? The raven-haired boy asked curiously. You going home early? Yeah, Naruto said plainly. I barely got by with a passing grade and the headmaster already said we weren't invited back next year, so I'm going to go ahead and split for home. Won't your mom be upset at you leaving early? Naruto gave a hearty laugh. No way. I've gotten into so many fights at my other schools that she'd think it was weird if I didn't get kicked out of school. She'd probably congratulate me for lasting this long into the year, though, before getting expelled. You going anywhere special? Maybe some kind of summer camp. I got this weird pamphlet for a Camp Half-Blood in my locker, so I might give them a shot, Naruto said, causing Percy to freeze in place. Grover gave me a business card with Camp Half-Blood on it, Like that was where he lived or worked, Percy said. Naruto smiled. All the more reason to go then. What about the Mrs. Dodds incident? Naruto sighed. Well, we haven't seen or heard anything outside of the ordinary since then. Maybe it was just a one-time deal. Mistaken identity and whatnot. And Mr. Brunner insulting us. Saying we didn't belong here? Are you sure he meant to insult you like that? Naruto asked. He may have just been trying to find the right words to explain it to you since, you're his favorite student and he hated to tell you that the headmaster said you weren't welcome back next year. Some people just aren't that good at giving bad news. I didn't take it personally and neither should you. Percy sighed. Now that you say it like that, I feel kinda bad about blowing up on him like that. I'll apologize to him the next time I see him. Naruto closed his suitcase and fastened the latches on it. Well, I guess I'll see you later, Percy. Yeah, Percy said with a sad smile. I'll see you later, Ruto. And with those parting words, Naruto took the local bus back home, unable to wait to tell his mother about what happened. His face to face with an actual monster. Fighting and defeating said monster. Discovering he was a demigod, and his meeting with Chiron. It was going to be a long summer indeed. You did what? That is the sound made by an angry, upset mother when told their son had killed his pre-algebra teacher who turned out to be a monster who believed her son had stolen something from her, whoever she worked for. Well, to be honest, she was looking at Percy more than she was looking at me when she was shrieking about stealing something. Naruto admitted with his hands held in a placating manner. You could have died, Kushina screamed. But we didn't, Naruto said. While she wanted to argue with him, Kushina knew that Naruto was just like any Uzumaki. Stubborn to a fault and incredibly proud. All she could do was shake her head and smile softly. I'm just glad you're safe, she said. Naruto frowned slightly when he thought back to his conversation with Chiron. But I'm not, am I? Kushina raised an eyebrow. Chiron told me that Dad is one of the Greek gods. That I'm a demigod and that creatures like Mrs. Dodds will go out of their way to kill me. Kushina sighed and ruffled her baby boy's head of spiky blonde hair, irritating him slightly since he believed himself to be too old for stuff like that. I'm sorry you had to learn about him like that, she admitted. I guess I was hoping to have a few more years with you before you found out. Just a few more years of thinking you were normal. Or at least as normal as an Uzumaki can be. It's not like I'll be gone forever as soon as I get to Camp Half-Blood, Naruto stated. Chiron told me that I would get a choice whether to go there year-round or just for the summer. I can train during the summer and come back to go to school, or just spend time with you. Kushina shook her head. If you were anyone else's son, you would probably be right about that, but you are as much your father's son as you are mine. You are just too strong for those monsters to ignore. Of course, I would love to have you come visit once in a while, but you will need to stay at the camp almost all year round. Why else do you think I taught you how to fight and sent you to those martial arts classes? Just in case a monster caught a whiff of your god blood and uncovered who you really were, you would be able to defend yourself. So you knew this would happen, he asked in an agitated tone. Kushina nodded sadly. When I told your father I was pregnant with you, he told me to send you to Camp Half-Blood when you turned 7 so you would be protected from monsters and would eventually learn to defend yourself. I guess it was selfish of me to want you to stay by my side and hope that monsters didn't find out about you being a demigod. Mom, Naruto said in a hushed whisper. But after everything that's happened so far, I don't think you'll be safe here anymore, she admitted. Unfortunately, the car is in the shop, so I can't drive you to Camp Half-Blood. You'll have to go there on foot. Without a weapon or something, I'll be picked off fairly easily, Naruto said flatly. I know, Kushina said cheerfully before walking into the closet. The sounds of shuffling clothes and moving boxes could barely be heard over his mother's constant whining along the lines of, it should be around here somewhere, and, what did I do with that stupid old thing? Naruto was about to ask what his mother was searching for when she suddenly shouted, aha, followed by the smack of a board on flesh followed yet again by a loud, yet childish, owie. Damn it, who put that shelf there? Naruto was just thankful nobody else was around or he would have hidden his face simply from the embarrassment his mother's comment was having on him at that point in time. Instead, he only palmed his face and shook his head. Why did his family have to be so weird? A flaky Greek god for a father and a childish, volatile redhead for a mother. Why did he have to be the relatively normal one? When Kushina walked out of the closet, Naruto's eyes were instantly drawn to the bronze rod that was just a bit longer than her closed fist, along with a small quiver of bronze arrows in her other hand. Your father gave these to me before you left. He wanted you to have them when you were supposed to go to Camp Half-Blood in order to protect yourself. Naruto looked at the staff his mother handed him questionably while strapping the quiver to his back. What am I supposed to do with a bronze rod? Beat a monster to death with it? His mother giggled. Squeeze the rod. It's special. Naruto did as his mother suggested and watched in awe as the rod transformed into a bronze recurve bow. Okay, I'm only going to say this once. Dad, whoever the hell you are, thanks for the badass bow. Kushina looked up at the sun and saw it was beginning to set. You should stay here for tonight. It will be dark before long and you'll need all of your energy to make it to Camp Half-Blood just in case you get attacked by monsters along the way. Naruto nodded in acknowledgement before hugging his mother tightly. I love you, Mom, he whispered before heading to his room to prepare for his journey. By the time Naruto was out of earshot, Kushina's smile turned into a neutral frown. You're taking a huge risk by showing up now, grandfather, she said firmly. From the shadows, a pair of seafoam green eyes shone brightly in a palpable sense of amusement. Does he know about me? About his lineage? Kushina scoffed. He's only learned about his father, in spite of not knowing who he is yet. If he knew his god blood was thicker than most other demigods. Why are you so bitter about him going to Camp Half-Blood? The figure asked. Surely you must have known this was going to happen eventually. Kushina spun around quickly and glared directly into the eyes of her grandfather. Why am I bitter? She spat venomously. Because he shouldn't have to deal with bullshit like fighting monsters in order to survive. Having to wait for his father to claim him before he can even hope to grasp the gist of the situation his birth holds on the world. Because his best friend is technically his great uncle. Because my mother should have been your last child after World War II. Believe me, I have several dozen reasons to be bitter about him going to Camp Half-Blood, though most of them are your fault in the first place. The green eyes of the shadow seemed to lose some of their brilliance. And now I am paying for my mistakes. Zeus believes I stole his master bolt and demands either I or Percy delivers it to him by summer solstice or war will break out between the gods. Kushina froze in place and her hands clenched into fists. Her knuckles turned white and her nails threatened to draw blood from her palm. You are a piece of work, you know that? Not only do you put your son's life in danger by breaking the oath, but now you're going to drag my son into it. I am sorry, Kushina, the figure said sadly. Get out of my house, Kushina spat in a whispered hiss. I have to get Naruto ready for his trip to camp. The figure nodded and the green eyes closed before his presence vanished entirely. The next morning, after a healthy breakfast of cereal and eggs, Naruto picked up his backpack and put the quiver of arrows inside of it before stuffing the rod in his pocket before walking to the front door with his mother following quickly behind him. Before he opened the door, his mother gave him a few comforting words of advice and one last hug and kiss on the cheek before sending him on his way with about $1,000 in cash, bills both small and large and a prayer. As the hours passed, Naruto could feel his nerves begin to flitter around. His eyes flew from person to person, seemingly trying to figure out who could be a monster and who was a regular jackoff. He could feel several pairs of eyes on him and it kind of freaked him out a bit. But the sun's rays seemed to put him at ease, if only just slightly. With every passing glance, Naruto could swear he saw some people grow fangs as sharp as any sword and eyes that looked like they could steal your soul and end your life with relative ease. As he approached Yanxi Academy's main gates, he could have sworn he saw a massive hawk sitting on the rooftop looking down at him with a sparkle in its eyes. Pulling out the map Chiron gave him, the blonde studied it intensely before looking at his surroundings and finally setting off toward Camp Half-Blood once again. As night began to fall, Naruto had made it to Queens. It didn't take long for him to begin to feel tired. So he looked around and found an abandoned building on the far side of the city. Looking around, Naruto noticed nothing out of the ordinary. The air in the empty building smelled stale and dry with years of dust and debris. Pipes that used to carry water were rusty and hollow, only adding to the sense that this was like those old ghost towns you heard of out west from the 1800s. As he continued his search, he could have sworn he saw something run from the shadows behind a large machine that had since died from the years of decay and malfunctions. Naruto reached into his pocket and grabbed the bronze rod, clenching it tightly in his hand as more of a safety precaution than to use it as a weapon at the moment. Swoosh! This time, he drew the rod and practically crushed it in his palm, causing the bow to appear in an instant before drawing a bronze arrow from the hidden quiver in his backpack. His senses were on hypersensitive and hyperactive, like a light switch had just been flipped on in his mind. His eyes seemed to adjust to the darkness quickly. He could hear growling coming from the shadows and two pairs of yellow eyes shone against the darkness. Naruto kept his arrow trained on the eyes in front of him, though he knew the ones behind him were just as dangerous as the ones he could see. A primal roar and Naruto barely avoided being tackled from behind by this massive black, furless dog-like thing with yellow, reptilian eyes and a body of pure muscle. He loosed his arrow at the dog while its back was turned and watched as it exploded into golden dust, signifying its demise, and a pile of black leather-like skin fell where it once stood. Unfortunately, this gave the other creature the chance to attack and it took full advantage. Naruto felt 100 pounds of pure muscle barrel into his side, knocking him to the ground and causing his bow to clatter to the far end of the building, under one of the machines. The other pitch-black dog-like thing growled as it turned around quickly and rushed him again. This time, Naruto was slightly more prepared and planted his feet on the monster's abdomen before launching him into the brick wall, causing it to be knocked down. The building shook violently, a sign that the wall that now had a hole in it was an example of just how rundown the building itself was. If the young boy had to take a guess, he would say that the building was on the verge of collapsing with him still inside. He had to get to his bow quickly and kill this other monster before the building fell on top of him. Demigod or not, he was pretty sure having a building collapse on him would kill him in an extremely violent manner that he didn't want to experience anytime soon. Scrambling toward the machine, he reached under in an attempt to grab his bow, but it was just a bit out of reach. Stretching his tiny fingers as far as they could go, he could just barely touch the bowstring. He curved his finger around it and pulled until the bow was now firmly resting in his hands. He heard the creature roar as it lunged at him. Spinning around to his back, he blocked the creature's jaws with his bow. He needed an arrow. He was actually going to die. Die in this crumbling building where nobody would even realize he was gone. No. B.A. bump. He refused to die in such a miserable, pathetic way. B.A. bump. B.A. bump. He was going to make it to Camp Half-Blood and find out who his father was. B.A. bump. B.A. bump. B.A. bump. My name is Naruto Uzumaki, he growled at the creature, unaware that a glowing arrow of light was resting knocked to his bow as he pulled back the string with the arrow pointing directly into the beast's mouth. And I refuse to die until I find out who I am and leave my mark on this world. With that, he loosed the glowing arrow into the creature's mouth, causing it to explode in a shower of golden dust, but it didn't stop there. The arrow continued on until it struck the roof, causing a massive explosion. Quick to retract his bow back into the bronze rod, he stuffed it into his backpack, along with the mass of black leather and ran out of the building just as it collapsed entirely. It didn't take long for police cars and fire trucks to come screaming down his way. Thinking quickly, Naruto ran toward the nearby alley before hiding behind a large dumpster. As the police began to investigate the scene, they decided to call it a drug deal by local gangs gone wrong. With the fire put out and the investigation over, Naruto curled up in his sleeping bag behind the dumpster he was hiding behind and went to sleep, absolutely exhausted from the fight that just took place moments ago. The following day, Naruto packed everything up and continued on his journey. Within a few minutes, Naruto found himself at a local diner where he got some breakfast and found someone who would give him a ride to wherever he needed to go. When he said he was heading to a camp close to Montauk, she informed him that she too was heading there after work for a week-long vacation. Her name was Kurenai Yuhi. She wore a waitress uniform similar to those old-school diner uniforms and had long brown hair and ruby-red eyes that mesmerized him. She was nice enough. She gave him a discount on his breakfast and lunch and even talked to him when she wasn't busy. She asked him why he didn't take a bus to camp. Because it's so far out of the way and in the middle of the woods that no bus would be able to get there, he replied. She just nodded. Once her friend, Anko, came to relieve her, Kurenai clocked out and brought Naruto to an old 1978 Ford Mustang King Cobra that looked like it was being brought back to life with the occasional restoration job. It still looked well worn and put away wet. Naruto was definitely impressed that a waitress could afford such a nice ride and put in some money for restorations. The drive to Montauk was a quiet one, but not unwelcome. They enjoyed each other's company. They listened to some big band music, played some road games like the license plate game and I Spy. It was thoroughly enjoyable. As Naruto looked down at his map, he could feel the hairs on his neck stand up. Either he was getting close to Camp Half-Blood and he was getting anxious, or something bad was about to happen. "Miss Kurenai, can you pull over?" he asked. She nodded and pulled over on the side of an old farm road. Naruto got out of the car and looked around, his eyes scanning over every inch of the area. He could see a strawberry farm about half a mile ahead of where they pulled over. The woods seemed to sway violently, even though there was barely a breeze to be felt. "Is something wrong, Naruto?" Kurenai asked, worry evident in the tone of her voice. "No," he said firmly. "Go ahead to that cabin you rented, Miss Kurenai. Get there as fast as you can. My camp isn't too far from here. I can make it there from here easily enough." "Are you sure? I can take you further if you want." Naruto shook his head. "No, you need to go on your vacation. I need to get to my camp. Go, I can take care of myself." Kurenai nodded and got back in the driver's seat. Before taking off, she rolled down the passenger side window. "Naruto," she called out, catching his attention. "Even if you don't believe in the gods, never forget that they will always believe in you." With that said, Kurenai drove off down the street, a trail of dust flying behind her car. Mere moments after the smallest gust of wind blew away the dust and Kurenai and her car were gone. Naruto drew his bronze rod which turned into a bow with a flick of his wrist and a tightening of his grip. "Hermes, make my feet fly as fast as the four winds. Artemis, guide my arrow and help it strike true," he whispered as he ran as fast as he ever thought he could. "Father, watch over me and give me the strength to face any obstacle that comes in between me and my goals." An arrow of light appeared knocked on the string as he continued to run. That was when he came upon a scene that looked as though it came directly from his nightmares. Percy and Grover were laid up against a tall pine tree. Percy looked worse for the wear, but he was still conscious, though even that was starting to come and go as the minutes passed. Grover, however, was clearly unconscious and mumbling something. A horn was resting in Percy's lap, broken off from the massive minotaur that looked ready to charge them. "Hey, hamburger boy," cried Naruto, catching the attention of both Percy and the minotaur in question. "Eat this." The glowing golden arrow flew straight at the minotaur, catching it in the nose, severing the bronze ring from its nostrils and sending the monster exploding into golden dust. Just as the arrow flew through the minotaur, it seemed to dim until nothing was left except the faint afterglow of the arrow until even that faded from sight. Sweat dripped from Naruto's brow as he looked over the hill to see two girls and what looked like a centaur with brown hair. He looked at his bow in wonder before it turned back into a bronze rod he stuffed inside of his pocket before flopping on his butt. He looked down at his hands as they shook from exhaustion. That was twice he'd been able to conjure that glowing golden arrow. It clearly took a lot out of him. "Annabeth, go check on Grover and young Percy," the centaur called, his familiar voice of Chiron ordered out. "Tenten, you're with me." Naruto's vision was already blurry with the amount of energy he expended, but consciousness would not escape him. Naruto chuckled and waved his hand toward them. "Hey, Chiron," he said with a tired smile on his face. "It's been a while, hasn't it?" Chiron chuckled. "Indeed it has, Mr. Uzumaki. I'm glad to see you made it here safely." Naruto scoffed. "Safely my ass," he cried indignantly. "First I get attacked by that kindly one at the museum. Then I'm almost eaten by these two weird black dogs in Queens. Then I see my two best friends almost get turned into hamburger by the man bull thing. Why can't my life ever be simple, for crying out loud?" "We're demigods," said a girl with brown hair tied into twin buns and deep chocolate brown eyes. She wore a pink kippah-style blouse and dark green capri pants with black combat boots. "Our lives will never be simple." Naruto groaned. "Please don't remind me. It sucks thinking that the reason I almost got eaten or killed is just because my old man is a god and can't keep it in his pants for a century or two." Tenten giggled to herself before just flat out busting a gut laughing at him. "Oh gods," she said trying to regain her breath. "I can't breathe." "Mr. Uzumaki," Chiron said flatly. "It's not wise to make fun of the gods like that." Naruto scoffed. My old man should have known I'd be like this before he chose to get my mom pregnant. We Uzumaki have always had a rebellious streak. Indeed, Chiron said flatly. I would still suggest you use discretion when mocking the gods, especially when you are not within the barriers surrounding the camp quite yet. Meh, Naruto said without a care in the world. Tenten put an arm around Naruto's shoulder, almost knocking him flat with her surprising strength considering her lithe frame. I can just tell that we're gonna be great friends. Naruto chuckled and scratched the back of his head sheepishly. So what happens now? For now, we should get Grover and Percy to camp to receive medical attention, Chiron informed him. Following a checkup of your own, Tenten will give you a tour of the camp. Afterwards, if you still haven't been claimed by your father, you will be assigned a bunk in Hermes' cabin until you are claimed. However, if your father is one of the minor Olympians, you can be sponsored by one of the 12 Olympians to stay in their cabin. Naruto sighed. Great. Just wonderful. How long does it usually take for a parent to claim their child? Chiron looked away and Tenten looked rather interested in the bronze bar sticking out of Naruto's pocket ever so slightly. Naruto felt a weight suddenly strike his head as his eye twitched angrily. Tell me that everyone is claimed. Again, the two decided that something else was suddenly more interesting. Why can't anything be simple anymore? If you can't keep it in your pants and get pregnant or get someone else pregnant, at least have the testicular fortitude to claim your children. Tenten grinned while Chiron rubbed his forehead as though stricken by a sudden migraine. Yeah, we're definitely going to be best friends, Tenten said with a chuckle. Let's just get you three to the infirmary before the gods decide to strike us down with extreme prejudice. Chiron groaned before hoisting Percy on his back while Annabeth got Grover and Tenten helped steady Naruto before they headed off to the campgrounds. It only took them half an hour to reach the camp. Grover was taken by other satyrs while Annabeth helped Chiron set Percy down on a bed while Naruto just sat down on the one next to him. Percy was observed first since he looked to be in far worse condition than Naruto. The nurse said he broke a few ribs from the blow the Minotaur gave him in combination with the concussion he sustained from hitting the tree. Otherwise, he would be alright after some bed rest and some nectar and ambrosia. Naruto, surprisingly enough, was only suffering minor exhaustion from using his powers too much after awakening them. What his powers were, she had no idea. Neither did Chiron, Annabeth, or Tenten since they arrived after he used it. Thankfully, nobody asked him to try to use them. He wasn't sure he was willing to stay in the hospital longer if one more use would put him in a similar state as Percy. Once he was cleared and listed as perfectly healthy, Chiron and Tenten walked to the big blue building where Grover was sitting with an older man who wore a leopard print shirt over a blue t-shirt with shaggy black hair and matching black goatee. They were playing cards, pinochle, if Naruto were to hazard a guess. When Grover spotted Naruto walking alongside Chiron and Tenten, he ran up to him and hugged the boy, thanking him for saving both his and Percy's lives from the Minotaur. Naruto waved off the praise with a blush. Chill out, Grover, Naruto said, scratching the back of his head and trying to hide his embarrassment from everyone. I'd do it for any of my friends, Grover. It's not that big a deal. You killed Pasiphae's son, exclaimed Tenten and Grover simultaneously. Do you know how many demigods wished they had that same opportunity? It's not that big a deal, Naruto stated firmly. I'm sure that if I hadn't shown up, Percy would have been able to deal with it just as easily as I did. Don't sell yourself short, Naruto, Chiron stated with a gentle smile. For someone who has yet to be trained in any form of combat aside from your martial arts, you did incredibly well. Naruto pulled out the bronze rod and clenched it in his hand, causing it to expand into its full bow form. I don't know why, but when I was shooting those black dogs and Pasiphae's son with my bow, I just felt like everything I needed to know was downloaded into my head. Like I knew what to do and how to get it to do what I needed it to do on pure instinct. Chiron nodded. Some demigods here have claimed something similar when they were handed a weapon their godly parent was known to wield. It isn't a rare occurrence, but it is far from common as well. Hold on a moment, called Grover. Black dogs? Naruto nodded and pulled the black leathery hide from his backpack. When I killed one, this fell from it. The other dog dropped a tooth. Grover didn't even need to inspect the hide to know what Naruto had faced, and his chocolate skin paled several shades lighter. You fought and killed 2 hellhounds. Where? Queens, Naruto informed them. I found this abandoned building with loads of old machines in it. Once my eyes got adjusted to the dark, I thought I saw something darting between the machines. A few minutes later, I was ambushed by the two bastards. With some quick thinking and a moment where I almost had my face chewed off, I killed them both, resulting in a minor incident. You call demolishing an old newspaper factory a minor incident, called the man wearing the leopard print shirt. I didn't get caught and the police thought it had to do with drug dealers, Naruto said, placing a hand against his chin before grinning madly. Yeah, that sounds relatively minor when compared to some of my more daring exploits back when I thought I was a normal human. Like the time you blew up the principal's desk in the 4th grade, Grover complained with a bleeding sound at the end. Or the time you managed to give the biggest bully in the 3rd grade an atomic wedgie before hanging him by his underwear from the flagpole. It took firefighters hours just to get him down without making the situation worse than it already was. That was then. This is now, Naruto said quickly, trying his best to change the subject. Now, what is this place? I know it's a place for demigods, but aside from that, I'm pretty lost. Well, at least you aren't as stupid as some demigods who come here, the scruffy-looking man said. First, I believe I should introduce myself. I am Mr. D, the camp's director. Chiron here is the activities director. Camp Half-Blood is a place where demigods come to train, take on quests, and live their lives as normally as possible within the safety of the barrier while continuing to train. The demigods are divided into 12 cabins signifying the 12 Olympians. New arrivals will typically go to Hermes' cabin, cabin 11, until their godly parent claims them, Mr. D stated firmly. If your parent is from one of the 12 major Olympians, they will be sent to that god or goddess cabin. If your parent is one of the minor Olympians, the counselor of one of the major 12 can sponsor you and you will be allowed to live there if the vote is unanimous enough. If no counselor sponsors you, you will live in Hermes' cabin since he openly accepts demigods in his cabin even if they aren't his children. Naruto nodded, taking all of the information in before turning to Tenten. So who is your godly parent? Tenten smiled. Hephaestus, the god of the forge. His children live in cabin 9. We forge all of the weapons and armor and repair any that is in bad shape. If anyone took care of their weapons and armor as much as my brothers and I do, we wouldn't need to keep the forges running 24/7. That's pretty badass, Naruto stated. Tenten nodded. Do you know anything about your godly parent, Naruto? Naruto shook his head. Not much. Just the things my mom knew about him. He was a flaky, womanizing, pathetic excuse for a poet. I've got his hair and eyes, though. Tenten shook her head. She had an idea about who Naruto's father was, but nothing concrete. Well, there are a ton of blue-eyed blondes who attend the camp. Most of them belong to Apollo, but I've seen some in several other cabins, though because you know your godly parent is your father, that takes a huge chunk out of the list of possible parents. The young boy nodded. For some reason, the thought of finally finding out who his father was filled him with both joy and fear. Would his father be proud of him? Would he be so ashamed of his very existence that he refused to claim him? Did his father even give a damn about him? He shook his head free from the dark thoughts and continued to follow Tenten as she guided him toward all of the cabins and eventually to the stables. As Naruto approached the stables with Tenten, something rang through his ears. He paused briefly and closed his eyes. Focusing only on his hearing, Naruto tried to hear the sounds coming from the stables. There was a lot of neighing, but one thing sounded off. There was another, far different sound coming from the stables. A yipping, if he had to guess. Naruto ran to the stables so suddenly that Tenten, who had been stunned by his sudden action, ran after him, shouting at him to stop or slow down. Either he didn't hear her or he was too preoccupied in finding the source of the sound that he continued to run straight toward the stables. As soon as he opened the barn door, he saw this crimson fox jumping between two horses, trying its hardest to get them to play with it. The horses seemed to ignore the tiny kid in favor of eating their hay. Naruto couldn't help but smile at the scene and giggled to himself. The fox stopped its frantic jumping and spun around to look at Naruto with a feeling of fear waved over it. But before it could flee, it paused. His nose inhaled the scent of the young boy carefully. Hesitantly, it took a few steps closer and continued to take in the scent of the strange, smiling blonde boy. Tenten stood back, behind Naruto as he knelt down to the fox and offered it his hand. Warily, the fox walked up and sniffed his palm before happily yipping and rubbing its cheek against it. Naruto carefully picked up the fox and placed it on his shoulder before turning around to Tenten's shocked expression. "Do you know what that fox is?" Tenten said quite loudly. Naruto looked over to his new friend and scratched its scalp. "Cute, furry, warm. It's a Tumesian fox," she shouted. "It was a great being that was destined to never be caught." "If it makes you feel better, I technically didn't catch it," Naruto said flatly. "Besides, I've always had a thing for animals. Dogs, cats, crows. I am generally well liked by the animal kingdom." "That's not the point," she cried out. "The original Tumesian fox was sent to the stars and became Canis Minor. It should be impossible for him to exist right now." Naruto shrugged his shoulders. Maybe the original Tumesian fox had kits, who were, as its father, destined to never be caught. I mean, the gods and goddesses have kids all the time. Why not the Tumesian fox? Tenten opened her mouth, then shut it again before shaking her head. His logic made sense, in some strange and twisted way. She just didn't want to think about it anymore. As she guided him and gave him the general tour, she noticed that Naruto and his new fox friend were taking in her every word. Before long, the tour was over and Naruto was guided back to Chiron, who was now collecting several chips from Mr. D and Grover. Chiron and Mr. D looked up and gaped at the fox resting on Naruto's shoulder. Mr. D knew that fox well enough. He knew the progenitor of the fox's bloodline and was both stunned and mildly interested in what was going to happen since the Tumesian fox had decided to appear back on the mortal plane once more. Regardless, the following years were bound to be interesting. As Naruto and Tenten walked back to the big house, Naruto noticed that several of the girls were oogling this slightly tall boy with jet black hair and eyes as he attacked a training dummy with a Xiphos. "Who's that guy?" Naruto asked curiously. Tenten sighed. "His name is Sasuke Uchiha. He's a son of Nemesis, goddess of vengeance, balance, and retribution. She's one of the minor Olympians, but that doesn't stop Aphrodite's and some of Ares' daughters from swooning over him like some kind of love-struck fangirls." Naruto scoffed. "He doesn't seem that cool to me. Like he's gotta stick up his ass or something." Tenten honestly laughed. "Yeah, he's pretty much an asshole to almost everyone. Even those fangirls of his, but that doesn't seem to stop them from swooning over him and trying to get his attention." "So who is ballsy enough to sponsor him?" Naruto asked, causing Tenten to groan. It was a toss-up between Ares' cabin and Aphrodite's cabin, but Mr. D gave it to Ares' cabin since he doesn't want Aphrodite's girls to rape him in his sleep, Tenten remarked. "Are there any more kids of the minor gods and goddesses who attend camp?" Tenten nodded. "There are several, though not nearly as many as you would think since the minor Olympians don't have cabins," she said. "Aside from Sasuke, we also have Shikamaru Nara. He's a son of Hypnos. Kurenai Yuhi, who is a daughter of Hecate." "Hold on," Naruto interrupted. "Miss Kurenai attends the camp? She's the one who got me close enough to camp that I was able to rescue Percy and Grover from Pasiphae's son." Tenten giggled. "Let me guess, she was a beautiful waitress who offered to drive you to camp?" Naruto nodded. "Well, Hecate is the goddess of magic and witchcraft. She is actually a little older than us and often escorts some of the new demigods to camp. She manipulates the mist to look like an adult, drive a car, even get a job as part of her disguise, though her favorite jobs are as a waitress and a cab driver because it allows her to escort demigods here safely." "Manipulate the mist?" Tenten nodded. "The mist is what protects demigods and monsters from mortal eyes. For instance, if a demigod was being attacked by a hellhound, mortals would likely see a massive guard dog attacking you or something along those lines. Sometimes, mortal children can see through the mist to some degree because their minds are more open to our world, but adults will always see something they believe to be more reasonable in their mind. Essentially, she can even fool demigods by manipulating the mist," Tenten stated. "She's been sponsored by Athena's cabin because of her use of tactics and incredible intelligence." "That sounds pretty awesome," Naruto admitted, though he really wished Kurenai had just told him the truth instead of manipulating the mist around him. It was kinda embarrassing to be manipulated so easily. "Now, back to our other demigods from minor gods and goddesses," Tenten said, bringing him back to his original question. "We have Tsunade Senju, daughter of Taish, goddess of luck and fortune. Surprisingly, contrary to what most would like to believe, she has absolutely terrible luck when it comes to gambling. She's sponsored by Dionysus because she loves to drink alcohol enough that she could probably be considered his daughter. What's she like? Naruto asked. She's pretty cool once you get to know her, but when she's drunk, she's an absolute riot, Tenten said with a chuckle. She has a huge crush on Dan Kato, son of Nike, goddess of victory, who is sponsored by Apollo's cabin due to his interest in healing. So far those are the only children of minor gods and goddesses that I know about, though there may be some who haven't been claimed, were killed getting to camp, or are simply living their lives in blissful ignorance. Naruto shook his head and silently muttered a prayer for any demigods, born of major or minor gods and goddesses, who have yet to reach Camp Half-Blood. So what now? Usually, I'd bring you to Hermes' cabin where you'd stay until your father claimed you, she admitted. For some demigods, if your parents are someone like Aphrodite or Hermes with a weak scent, it's almost guaranteed you'd be claimed relatively quickly compared to the other demigods. But you, I can already tell you're different. You're a lot stronger than most demigods who come through here if you were attacked by hellhounds and how you saved Percy and Grover from Pasiphae's son. It might take something to convince your father to claim you. Naruto snorted. My old man might need convincing, he said sarcastically. Believe me when I say this. If my dad doesn't want my mom to go to Olympus and tear him apart, he'll claim me before the end of the summer. Tenten looked at him like he'd grown a second head. But your mom is just a mortal. She wouldn't even be able to stand up against a god, much less go to Olympus. Naruto chuckled to himself. If there is one thing you will find out sooner or later, it's that an Uzumaki is like a raging whirlpool. We find ways to do the impossible. If my mom is pissed off at my dad, there are so very few things that will actually be able to stop her that you might as well just sacrifice the poor bastard who pissed her off for the sake of your own survival. She can be incredibly violent and brutal when she gets upset. Wow, Tenten gasped. You sound like you've had first-hand experience. Naruto shuddered as an odd chill raced down his spine. Not me personally, he said gingerly. You see, it was at one of those crappy parent-teacher meetings. My third-grade English teacher, Mr. Thorntwan, was calling me all kinds of derogatory names. Delinquent, thug, idiot, retard, monster. Well, eventually, after hearing enough of his slander, she walked up to his desk and, I shit you not, punched him in the face so hard that his head broke the chalkboard behind his desk. His nose broke. His jaw was practically shattered. He suffered from several concussions from her fist hitting his face, his head hitting the chalkboard, and then his head hitting the tile floor. After threatening him with blackmail if he didn't quit his job as a teacher, he committed himself to an insane asylum and never left in fear that my mother would somehow find him and murder him. By this point, Tenten was incredibly pale compared to her usual healthy tan. Your mom is a total badass, Naruto, was all she said about that before motioning him to follow her. After a few minutes of walking, her tan returned, but she refused to say anything more about his mother. Eventually, the duo, now trio if you include the young fox kid, were heading back from their tour to the cabins again. Well, since you have yet to be claimed yet, you will be spending the remainder of your unclaimed days in Hermes' cabin. What about Percy? Naruto asked. Will he be alright? Tenten nodded. With both Grover and Annabeth watching over him while he recovers, he should be feeling better by tomorrow. You can visit him then. Naruto nodded and walked to Hermes' cabin, the most normal-looking, but worn-down cabin you would ever hope to see before opening the door with Tenten right behind him. Everyone stopped what they were doing and turned to the two immediately. The one who stood out the most was an older boy with a mop of blonde hair and dark blue eyes, though one of them had a jagged scar across them. Hey, Tenten, he said amicably. New recruit? Tenten sighed in frustration. One of them, Luke, she said, causing Luke to look at her oddly. The other one was with Grover when they were attacked by Pasiphae's son. Naruto saved both of their lives. Luke walked over to Naruto and looked him up and down as if examining him for some kind of flaws. Well, anyone who would save Grover is a friend of mine, he said with a smile before extending his hand to the spiky-haired blonde, who caught the action and shook hands. A deep, dark chill seemed to flow down his spine, though this time it felt far more odd than the one he had from remembering his mother's violent outburst toward his former English teacher. This chill held a foreboding air to it, something Naruto made sure to remember in the future. So, have you been claimed by Hermes or are you still unclaimed? He asked curiously. Obviously he's unclaimed, mocked Tenten. If there's one person I doubt is his father, it's Hermes. You can't possibly know that. Luke threw back at her. Whatever, she said with a sigh. Just don't be surprised when I'm proven right. Luke simply glared lightly at her before turning to Naruto with a warm smile. Welcome to Hermes' cabin. If you didn't already find out, my name is Luke Castellan. I'm one of Hermes' sons and the counselor of the cabin. What does it mean to be a counselor of a cabin? Naruto asked. Rather than Luke, Tenten decided to answer the question. Counselors are either the oldest or have spent the most time at camp. Sometimes, if the counselor decides he can handle the world on his own and chooses to leave camp to try and shell out a normal life among mortals, they may choose the next counselor based on experience, fighting ability, the time they've spent at camp, and the one who is able to best represent their cabin. If, however, in the event that a counselor dies, the next oldest will take his or her place. Naruto swallowed a lump in his throat. Does that happen often? He shakily asked. A counselor dying, I mean. Tenten shook her head. Not really. They may get incredibly hurt on a quest or on their way back to camp for another summer, but it's rare for a counselor to die. Besides, monsters can't come into the barrier without permission. Somehow, your little fox friend was able to get past the barrier surrounding the camp. Or maybe the barrier just doesn't qualify him as a monster, replied Luke. I mean, the Pegasi are in a similar category. They aren't quite monsters, but also aren't ordinary animals. You may have a point, Castellan, Tenten remarked. Looking at her watch, she sighed. I've got to get back to the forges or my brothers will give me an earful. I'll see you later, Naruto. Naruto waved off his first friend at camp before going into the Hermes cabin. I think you're gonna like it here, Naruto called Luke as he showed the boy. We've got a few spare bunks for unsorted demigods like you. We've even got some spare toothbrushes, toothpaste, and other toiletries you might need during your time at camp. That's cool, Naruto said briefly. So what is the schedule like around here? You know, for training and other camp activities. Luke pulled off a small schedule from the bulletin board and handed it to Naruto. 8 a.m., breakfast and cabin inspection. 9 a.m. to 10 a.m., sword and shield with Clarice and Aries cabin. 10 a.m. to 11 a.m., archery with Chiron. 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., winged horseback riding with Demeter cabin. 1 p.m. to 2 p.m., monster assault techniques with Hermes cabin. 2 p.m. to 4 p.m., free choice. Arts and crafts with Hephaestus cabin. Or, canoe races with Naiads. Or, climbing wall with satyrs. 4 p.m. to 5 p.m., swim and beach time with Nereids. 5 p.m. to 6 p.m., free time, volleyball, or cabin cleanup. 6 p.m. to 9 p.m., capture the flag. 9 p.m. to 10 p.m., bonfire and sing along with Apollo cabin. 10 p.m., prepare for bed, lights out by 11 p.m. Naruto's eyes skimmed over the list of activities and silently nodded to himself, knowing which activities he would be participating in almost immediately, though he would switch freely between two of the three on the free choice place in the schedule. Canoe racing just didn't appeal to him. Looking at the clock on the wall, Naruto noticed that it was nearing 10 o'clock. I guess it's about time for archery. Yeah, Luke said almost lazily. As you might notice, not all of us Hermes kids are expert archers. The blonde boy simply nodded to himself before pulling out his rod and crushing it in his grasp, extending his bow to its full length. I'd like to think I'm pretty decent since this baby, a gift from my old man, helped me out when I got attacked on the way here. Luke's eyes went wide. You got that from your dad? How? Naruto shrugged his shoulders. He gave it to my mom when he realized I was going to be born. She gave it to me when I told her I was coming to camp. So far, it's taken down 2 hellhounds and Pasiphae's son. Hopefully, it will bring me the same luck during my stay here. Luke seemed to simply shrug it off. Well, we don't really have monsters come into the camp thanks to the barrier surrounding us. The only time one actually does show up is if someone decides to play a prank or one of the instructors thinks it would help us learn to fight by luring one into the forest. Otherwise, we don't really see them that often. Naruto nodded to himself as he scratched the Tumesian fox that laid upon his shoulder where it tried to sleep as peacefully as it could with all of the talking going on in the cabin. Within the span of about 30 minutes, Naruto and his pet, friend Fox had gotten his small sleeping bag set up before heading to the archery range with the other residents of Hermes' cabin. Chiron was instructing a few new students in how to hold a bow properly and how to nock an arrow while older, slightly more experienced students, such as those from Apollo's cabin, were either helping Chiron teach or competing against one another to see who could make the best shot. As Naruto approached the range, he was approached by a young man with blonde hair and brown eyes. "Who's the kid, Luke?" he asked curiously. Luke smiled at the youth. "His name's Naruto. Naruto Uzumaki. He's one of the 2 new campers who showed up after Pasiphae's son appeared. Still hasn't been claimed though. And this is my friend, Kurama," Naruto offered. The kid looked up at the youth lazily before going back to sleep. "It's nice to meet you both. My name's Lee Fletcher. I'm one of Apollo's sons and the counselor of Cabin 7. The two shook hands. "So, how did you get here?" As Naruto told his tale, excluding the glowing arrows of light he had somehow conjured, Lee, curious about the bow in question, asked Naruto to show him the weapon. Pulling out the bronze rod from his pocket, Naruto crushed it in his palm and summoned the bow. Lee and several others gasped at the sight while Naruto simply did as his instincts ordered him to. He knocked an arrow and released it almost as quickly, sending the arrow flying, striking the dead center of the bullseye. Lee, Luke, and everyone else on the range were surprised at the level of skill being put on display by the new guy. It wasn't long before moving targets began to swing from the trees and Naruto picked up on the challenge. With frightening ease, Naruto nailed 5 of the 7 moving targets with a bullseye while the other 2 landed in the ring just outside. With relative ease, the boy clenched his hand around the bow and everyone watched as it collapsed into the form of his trusty rod. More than a few members of Apollo's cabin were clapping or whistling at the skill displayed by the new kid while others looked either mildly impressed or in a toned-down neutral glance, sizing him up. "That was amazing," Lee said excitedly. "And that bow was given to you by your father?" Naruto nodded. "Well, that can only mean one thing. Your father has to be either Ares, Hephaestus, or my own father, Apollo, who was a well-known archer among the Greek gods and goddesses. Maybe I'm just being a bit selfish, but I hope you're a son of Apollo," Lee admitted. "Sure, if you were a son of Hephaestus, it would be pretty cool, but Ares kids are all bloodthirsty bullies." "You're right about that," Luke mumbled to himself, already noticing the dirty looks Ares' children were sending them. "But don't worry too much about them. They shouldn't bother you too much after that little show you put on." Naruto scratched the back of his head sheepishly, something that caused a few of the girls from various cabins to swoon slightly at how cute he looked with that fox sleeping on his shoulder. "And Uzumaki never does anything half-assed. If we aren't working harder than everyone else, then something is wrong." Lee laughed quite loudly, much like the other sons and daughters of Apollo. At that moment, Naruto truly felt like he belonged. As time passed and he went through the activities that were going on, Naruto met with other demigods that he got along with. He formed a friendship with a few of Tenten's older brothers, who looked like professional football players with the amount of muscle piled on their bodies, and more than a few of Demeter's children during their winged horseback riding classes, which he quickly learned he was pretty good at. Not an expert horseback rider by any length of the imagination, but he was definitely getting used to it. As expected, Ares' sons and daughters seemed to hold nothing but animosity toward him after his archery display earlier. Even Sasuke Uchiha, the brooding raven-haired boy from earlier, seemed to glare at him as though he did something wrong. When Aphrodite's daughters took notice that Sasuke didn't like him, a vast majority also seemed to just hold nothing but distaste for him. When I say a majority, I mean almost everyone except for a blue-haired girl whose name he learned from one of the passing girls from Demeter's cabin. Hinata Hyuga, a daughter of Aphrodite, seemed to always get feverish and on the verge of passing out whenever she looked at him. She was nice enough, he guessed, but she was so shy and reclusive around others that she just seemed to melt into the background. Athena's sons and daughters also seemed to like him well enough after Kurenai showed back up and told them about his personality. Shikamaru asked if he wanted to play chess, to which the young blonde had said he didn't know how to play. After a few moments of instruction, the game had initially been won by Shikamaru, though it was incredibly difficult. Naruto would seemingly change strategies mid-game, confusing him and forcing him to adapt. The more games they played, the more often Shikamaru was put on the ropes by the unpredictable blonde. He won 95% of the matches, but he would be the first to admit that Naruto was an incredible opponent. In almost every game, Naruto used his king offensively rather than keep him back and safe from the strategist's attacking force. When asked why, Naruto would simply comment that a king who was not willing to sacrifice himself for his soldiers or fight alongside them, was not a proper king. This is what caused many of Athena's daughters and sons to respect him rather than his skill. Still, things were going fairly well for him. He made friends and learned new skills. The next day, he got a somewhat rude awakening when Annabeth Chase, a young daughter of Athena, practically stormed through the door of Hermes' cabin and proceeded to drag him to the infirmary where Percy was groggily waking up after his encounter with the Minotaur. Percy was drinking some odd-looking liquid from a cup and eating a couple of small squares that looked oddly enough like lemon squares while Grover was sitting in a chair on the other side of his bed. Naruto smiled widely and clapped Grover's shoulder. "Feeling better, boys?" he asked sarcastically. Percy looked ready to spit out his drink at the sight of Naruto's smiling face. Grover was bleeding from the sharp scare he received before turning to Naruto and wrapping his arms around the demigod's waist. "Thank you so much, Naruto," Grover said with a small stutter in his voice. "I don't know where you came from and I don't really care, but you saved both of our lives last night." "Hey," Naruto said as he tried, and failed, to get Grover to stop hugging him. "Back off, dude, I'm into chicks, not satyrs." Percy just smiled and quietly chuckled to himself at the joke. Once Grover removed himself, Naruto ruffled his curly hair with a cheeky grin. "What kind of friend would I be if I let my friends get turned into hamburger by a walking slab of beef? Speaking of coming from somewhere, how did you two get here?" "Smelly Gabe's Camaro," Percy said. "Mom took me to Montauk, to the cabin she met Dad in." That was when he grew quiet as events seemed to finally settle in his mind. "That thing killed Mom," he whispered to himself. Naruto's eyes widened in shock. Mrs. Jackson, he refused to use Gabe's last name since he was complete and utter scum who treated her like crap, was a kind woman who worked 2 jobs to support her deadbeat husband and Percy. He only met her a couple of times, but he remembered that she would always help out someone in need. "I'm sorry to hear that, Perce," Naruto said somberly. "Really, I am. She was a fantastic woman." Yeah. Things between the four were silent in order to allow Percy a moment to grieve. "Listen, Perce, we should go to see Mr. D and Chiron. They'll be able to help you figure things out for now. We can pay our respects to your mother when everything here is settled." "Okay?" Percy nodded and within a few moments, the four were headed to the big house. As soon as they arrived, Grover and Percy immediately noticed that there were 2 people playing pinochle. One was wearing a leopard print button-up shirt while the other looked like a mix between Mr. Brunner and a horse. "Chiron," Naruto shouted out, catching the attention of the centaur and Mr. D. "Percy just woke up." "Indeed he has," Chiron stated in response. "Mr. Brunner," Percy asked, causing the centaur to chuckle. "Here at Camp Half-Blood, my name is Chiron, Percy Jackson," Chiron informed him. "I only took up the teaching position because Grover told me that there were 2 demigods attending the same school as himself. Mr. Brunner was my alias." Percy nodded and sat down with Mr. D, Chiron, and Grover to play a game of pinochle while learning more about who and what he was. He found out that he was a demigod and his father was, in all likelihood, one of the Greek gods, just like Naruto. He discovered Grover was a satyr and had big dreams that required him to become a protector of demigods he came into contact with and that he failed on an incredibly important mission once several years ago. After following Naruto and getting set up in Cabin 11, he was introduced to the warm welcome of Ares' cabin's biggest bully, Clarice LaRue, and 2 of her friends. Naruto's eyes narrowed at the girl and his hand was inching closer to his bow. "What do you want, Clarice?" Naruto demanded harshly, causing the 3 Ares brats to glare at him. "We just wanted to initiate the 2 new guys at camp, Uzumaki," she ground out with a cocky smirk. "Why don't you just leave them alone, Wargirl?" called Annabeth as she jogged to meet up with Percy and Naruto. "Make me, princess," Clarice said with a bloodthirsty grin. "Come on, Percy," Naruto said with a heavy sigh. "I'll show you around the place." As Naruto and Percy turned around, one of the Ares kids took the moment to grab Naruto's shoulder firmly. Within the span of a few seconds, Naruto had stomped on the boy's foot, causing him to release his grip, and followed up with a solid jab to the gut, knocking the wind from his lungs and sending him to the ground. At that moment, Naruto placed his foot on the back of his head and slowly applied pressure, keeping his face in the dirt. "If anyone touches me or Percy again, I'll personally use them as target practice," he said darkly. Got it? Clarice frowned and walked away. This isn't over, new kid, she said harshly. Wait until Thursday's capture the flag match. You'll both be sorry you messed with me. When Naruto let the Aries boy up, he glared at him before making a hasty retreat. Why couldn't he be normal? The blonde asked himself as he and Annabeth showed Percy around the camp. Normal people don't have to deal with such weird things on a daily basis. After their little scuffle with Clarice and her thugs, Naruto, Percy, and Annabeth were making their way to the different areas in camp, showing Percy around so he wouldn't get lost. So, who was that girl? Percy finally asked. Clarice LaRue, daughter of Ares, god of war, Annabeth declared. Just as a warning, you should probably stay away from them. They're nothing but bullies who love to fight and pick on new demigods. I'll take your word, Percy whispered as he felt himself shrink slightly under her gaze. And whose daughter are you? Annabeth rolled her eyes and was about to speak until Naruto did it for her. She's a daughter of Athena, goddess of wisdom and battle strategy. A wise girl, you could say, Naruto teased her, causing her cheeks to glow crimson. Whether that was from embarrassment or anger was unclear, though Percy was willing to bet it was a little bit of both. Naruto had a habit of irritating people whether he knew it or not. Would you stop calling me that? She almost shouted at him. That isn't an endearing term to use for a daughter of Athena, you know. But it kinda is, Naruto replied. I mean, your brothers and sisters are super smart and nobody can win a battle without a good strategy. They turn to the wise ones for advice or battle preparations. She blushed a deep crimson and turned to Percy. How do you stand being his friend? She asked him. Percy just shrugged. I barely know myself, he informed her. He just started hanging out with me and Grover when we were kids and we've been friends ever since. Come on, Perce, Naruto groaned. If you're going to talk about me to your new girlfriend, at least wait until I'm not here anymore. Gee, girlfriend, Percy and Annabeth shouted incredulously. Naruto simply waved them off. Don't worry about me bumming out your little date. Kurama and I will just head to Hephaestus' cabin and chat with Tenten for a bit. Now who's the one with a girlfriend? Percy quipped. She's not my girlfriend, he informed calmly. Besides, she's actually kinda cool. She's into weapons and making weapons and armor. Even if I were so inclined, I'm sure she already likes someone else here at camp. It would never work out. Annabeth looked at him curiously. Now who's the wise boy? She said softly in a joking manner. Naruto laughed heartily. Me? Wise? You must be smoking something strong, Anna, Naruto stated with a soft sigh. Nah, I'm just more observative than you are. Comes from people watching. You begin to see things most people take for granted. Like a look of longing or a brush of one's hand against another person's hand is something other than a passing glance or accidental contact. We're only ever going to be friends. Percy and Annabeth looked at Naruto oddly. That has got to be one of the single smartest and saddest things I've ever heard come from him. Annabeth whispered to Percy, who nodded in agreement. Don't worry, Percy whispered in return. He'll eventually say something stupid that will make you retract that statement. He always does. Now, I'll be leaving you two lovebirds to confess your undying love for one another while simultaneously discussing the myth of love at first sight, Naruto said as he proceeded to jog to Hephaestus' cabin. And now I just want to hurt him, Annabeth declared. See, just when you think he says something smart, he always counters that by saying something incredibly stupid afterwards, Percy stated aside to himself. Yeah, Annabeth stated, I just wish he would stick with one personality. Preferably the smart personality over his stupid one. Maybe then he'd be able to realize that several girls in the camp are already attracted to him. Percy just chuckled. Yeah, but it's actually kind of funny watching all of these girls try to get Naruto's attention when he's completely oblivious to it all. Annabeth giggled with a nod as the pair watched Naruto dart off toward Hephaestus' cabin with Kurama following closely behind. For something so small and young, Kurama could move like the four winds when he wanted to. Meanwhile, Naruto had made good time and was currently approaching Hephaestus' bright bronze cabin when the door opened, revealing Tenten in her smithing uniform, telling him she was tending the forges today provided something got damaged during training. Hey, Tenten, the blonde shouted with an exaggerated wave of his hand. Can I ask you to help me out with something? Tenten raised an eyebrow but nodded in agreement all the same. Sure, she said calmly. What did you want? Naruto dug into his backpack that he carried simply as a habit and pulled out the two hellhound leather skins. I was wondering if you could make me some armor out of hellhound hide. Nothing fancy, just some standard leather armor with bronze plates for added protection. Tenten looked at the leather excitedly before snatching it out of his hands and examining them. These are incredible, she exclaimed in awe before looking back up to her friend. But why? I mean, most people keep their trophies in a case. Never asked for them to be made into a weapon or armor before. Well, I want to be able to show off my trophies, and what better way than by wearing or wielding them in battle or on quests? Naruto asked, earning a nod from Tenten. Besides that, I remember seeing one of those hellhounds kinda appear from the shadows in that abandoned warehouse, and I thought some of the properties of the monster the trophy came from could possibly pass on to anything made by them. Like a sword made with a gorgon's eyes would turn anything it came into contact with into stone or something. Tenten's eyes widened after hearing his explanation, and she soon agreed with him. She too was now curious about whether or not weapons and armor made from trophies would carry any special properties from the monsters they came from. I'm definitely going to have to ask Charlie for help on this one, since he's actually worked with leather more than I have, but I don't see why we can't make you a full set of leather armor from this hellhound leather, she admitted quickly enough. But why leather armor instead of the usual bronze armor? With leather armor, you tend to have a greater range of motion than when you're wearing any kind of metal armor, Naruto interjected. Not to mention you'd have a slight speed advantage because leather weighs less than the bronze armor you actively use. In exchange for these two bonuses, it's less durable than bronze armor and less likely to deflect a blow from a sword or an arrow. Thus my request to add bronze plates to it gives it slightly more durability and will make it just a bit harder to draw blood than ordinary leather armor would in case I get in a scrap. Tenten smiled and nodded. For someone who hadn't been claimed yet, he sure knew a good bit about different kinds of armor. Maybe he was her brother, a son of Hephaestus, but that didn't seem to fit his personality nor his body type very well. Is there anything else you want me to forge into something? Naruto paused in thought before shaking his head. Not right now. Maybe when I get the chance to collect more trophies, he told her, though he was somewhat tempted to ask her to forge the bronze ring from the Minotaur into a rapier, a pair of bracers that would increase his strength, or something like that. Then he'd have a Robin Hood thing going for him. He refused to wear tights, though. Screw that noise. Tights weren't cool unless you were taking gymnastics classes with a group consisting mostly of beautiful women, and even then, they didn't do the male figure justice like it did with women. Regardless, he decided to keep his trophies until he could figure out something to forge them into. This would no doubt be an experience for both Tenten and himself for future projects. The two of them made one hell of a team. So do you know whose team you're playing on for the Capture the Flag game coming up? Yeah, Naruto said, the team that doesn't have Clarice on it. Tenten gave off a nervous laugh. Clarice managed to work out a deal with Charlie for help with capturing the flag, Tenten said. Looks like we'll be enemies during the Capture the Flag game. Not enemies, Naruto said. Just friends temporarily on opposite sides of a mission. Enemies means we were never friends to begin with. Tenten got a good laugh out of that before looking back to her friend and giving him a grateful smile. I'm glad we're friends, Naruto, she said warmly. Something Naruto returned in earnest. So am I, Tenten, he gently called. I'll try and get this new leather armor to you before the game, she told him, finally remembering why he came all this way to visit with her for. I appreciate it, Naruto replied before looking up at the sky to note the sun's position. Looks like it's almost dinner time. I guess this is where I take off to join Hermes' cabin. Yeah, Tenten said somewhat sadly. She enjoyed talking with Naruto. He was just as good a listener as he was a talker. And boy could he talk for long periods of time and on a wide variety of subjects. She knew a little about him, but not as much as she would like. Naruto was interesting. He's got a pet fox whose ancestor was fated to never be captured. He was a fairly powerful demigod whose specialty seemed, from what she'd seen so far, to rest in archery. He also admitted to liking the sleek design of weapons slightly more modern than the Greek weapons they used. From what she gleaned from him during their current conversation, he seemed to prefer freedom to move instead of wearing the bronze armor the other demigods wore. Tenten wished she knew who his father was as well as what his favorite kind of food to eat was. What were his hobbies? What kinds of things did he like and dislike? What did he look for in a potential girlfriend? Not that she wanted to be his girlfriend, of course. She was usually too busy to think about dating between training and her work on the forge. Sure, she wouldn't be the first to admit that she thought Naruto was incredibly handsome, demigod or not. As he walked away, she walked back into the house to talk with her brother Charlie about the difficult challenge Naruto had placed before them. As sons and daughter of Hephaestus, they were always waiting for the next challenge, and forging armor and weapons from trophies was one such challenge. The reason being, nobody had ever thought to do something similar. Instead, they simply put their trophies on a shelf as a way to remember their conquests and forget about them as time moved on. But to wear your trophies into battle? That would be sure to get you noticed by your allies and enemies alike. That evening, Naruto had joined Hermes' cabin and Percy at the table, where they were served a wonderful dinner consisting of all kinds of foods. Naruto's plate was stacked with brisket, a small mixed fruit salad, and some artesian bread and cheese. In the goblet, which he had been informed that it was enchanted by the gods and goddesses to fill with whatever their hearts desired with the exception of alcohol and would never run dry, he requested a nice, soothing goblet of green tea mixed with freshly squeezed orange juice. His mother had somehow managed to get him to drink a cup of tea, and he'd become addicted with trying different kinds of tea. His favorite so far was green tea with orange, though he also liked the occasional Arnold Palmer, a mix of orange pekoe tea and lemonade. Before they began their feast, Chiron had told them about how and why they dedicate a small portion of their meals to their divine parents or the god or goddess whose cabin you were staying in. As the lines formed, Naruto was standing just behind Percy, who had just put out a fair portion of his meal. As soon as he stood up to the hearth, many things began to float around in his mind. He owed a lot to a lot of the gods and goddesses for their assistance throughout his journey to Camp Half-Blood. His first offering was to Hestia for the shelter, warmth, and the love of his dear mother and the kindness of his friends over the years. His next offering went to Artemis. Without her watching over him, he would have likely died at the maws of those two hellhounds and have been unable to save Percy and Grover's lives. His next offering went to Hecate because it was Kurenai who helped him reach Camp Half-Blood in the first place. The next one went to Hephaestus because of his fine craftsmanship of the bow he carried into battle and the friendship of his daughter, Tenton. The offering following that went to Hermes for sheltering him in his cabin until he got sorted and for giving him the ability to run fast enough to make it in time to save Percy and Grover. As for the last offering, he decided to give it to Percy's father and his own father. He owed Percy a lot. The two got into a lot of trouble together, and he doubted any of their adventures would have been half as fun without Percy at his side. Ordinarily, he wouldn't offer anything to his father simply out of spite for leaving him and his mother alone. However, there were times on his journey that he swore he could feel his father's divine presence watching over him, and he did provide the two of them with the funds needed to keep themselves alive and comfortable for the most part. As he put that last bit of food into the hearth, he could have sworn he smelled something so amazingly delicious, he had to resist not jumping into the hearth himself. It smelled oddly enough of his mother's homemade cooking. A fresh bowl of miso ramen with a fried egg on top and some other ingredients she kept hidden from him. That smell alone made him miss his mother even more than he thought possible. She was an amazing cook, but her only really good meal was something he got from her love of ramen. When she tried to cook meatloaf, it seemed to spring to life and try to attack them before the two of them beat it to death with their steel chairs, followed by a burning of the corpse, as well as a few prayers. However, in a strange coincidence, when she tried making meatloaf ramen, it turned out spectacular. Worthy of a 5-star restaurant. He shook his head before going back to his table spot beside Percy. The two quickly dug into the feast as though it were only a temporary reprieve from the constant training. Before the two could go for the first bite, Chiron stood up from his seat and addressed the camp. As all of you no doubt know, tomorrow is our weekly Capture the Flag game, he announced. The two teams will be led by Clarice and Annabeth. So train harder than you normally would because you will all need that strength for the battle tomorrow evening. And try to get a good night's sleep. That will be all. With Chiron's last words said, the entire camp dug into their meals with fervor while almost simultaneously talking with one another. Naruto and Percy weren't very comfortable talking with the members of Hermes' cabin simply because they didn't know them very well, and the two of them rarely talked to one another just because there wasn't that much to find out about one another that the other didn't already know. That, and there was little doubt that Percy was missing his mother and Naruto wasn't one to pour salt on his wounds. especially so if Percy kept picking at the wound before it could scab over and heal properly. The following morning, Hermione's cabin had sword and shield training with Clarice and her siblings. Percy felt the weight lift off of his shoulders when he was paired up with Luke. He also felt like his best friend was going to die because Naruto was the one Clarice chose to spar with her. Naruto wore a simple set of bronze armor and walked over to the weapons rack, picking up a sword that felt fairly well balanced and a sturdy shield before settling into a stance that had his shield in front of his chest and his sword poised to deliver a thrust at a moment's notice. Clarice's chocolate-brown eyes narrowed as she studied his stance. It was fairly solid and would allow him to counter almost any attack with ease. Naturally, he was used to fighting as an archer would. Keep the enemy away and take your shots when able, so he was probably going to try to parry her attacks while taking shots at any openings he could find. However, she could tell he wasn't used to the weight that came with a sword and shield, but he made up for it by instinctively distributing the weight in a way that would allow him a greater amount of balance while offering the greatest amount of protection. In all honesty, she was impressed with the instincts this new blood displayed, but she would never admit it out loud. Naruto seemed to naturally hold himself as a warrior would. Maybe he was another brother of hers and Ares simply hadn't claimed him yet, but then again, none of her kin, if she dared call them that, weren't that good with a bow. Without warning, Clarice charged toward Naruto, her sword ready for a downward slash only for it to be blocked by Naruto's sword followed by a shield bash. She protected herself from the heavy impact by using her own shield to absorb the blow, but she still felt herself get knocked back a bit. She did find out one more piece of information about him. He was surprisingly strong. Now she was curious as to who his godly parent could be. She had to shake herself from her internal dialogue when she noticed Naruto charge her leading with his shield. He thrust his shield at her, but she was ready and thrust her own shield at his, causing no disrupted movement. However, Naruto followed through with knocking her shield away and thrusting his Xiphos toward her stomach. She quickly parried with her sword and jumped back slightly to avoid any more surprise strikes. She could feel sweat begin to trickle down her brow and she saw that Naruto was in a similar state. They charged one another and their swords clashed in a shower of sparks. The more they clashed blades, the more attention they attracted. Throughout the entire battle, Naruto and Clarice's eyes never left the eyes of their opponent. Naruto was grinning and Clarice couldn't help but to grin as well. The two were thoroughly enjoying this sparring match, challenging one another and matching the other blow for blow. Clarice let out a mighty laugh. "You're pretty strong, new blood," she barked as she delivered a thrust to his shield arm. Naruto laughed in response. "And you're not bad either, Wargirl," Naruto said as he used his shield to parry another sword strike. Naruto and Clarice jumped away from the clash before charging one another for a final confrontation. In the middle of the arena, the two met and flew past one another. The audience waited with bated breath to see who drew first blood. As the two competitors turned to look at one another, everyone was surprised when they spotted two similar bleeding cuts on both Naruto's and Clarice's sword arms. The two walked up to one another before bumping fists with one another. "That was probably the best spar I've had since I got to camp," Clarice stated. "Yep," he replied. "Definitely the best scrap I've been in since I fought those hellhounds on my way to camp. I'd like to spar with you more often, if you're cool with that." Clarice laughed. "Of course I'd love to spar with you again, but I want to find out who your godly parent is first. That way, we can both go at it with everything we've got. After all, as the best swordswoman in camp, I have to keep my skills sharp by fighting strong opponents." "Were you in the same fight as I was?" Naruto asked with a smirk. "I believe I was taking charge for the majority of the match, which makes me the best swordsman." Clarice stepped forward, butting heads with Naruto and glaring at him eye to eye. "Oh yeah?" Naruto shoved his forehead against hers in retaliation while glaring into her eyes. "Yeah, you wanna go again, Wargirl?" "You bet, new blood," Clarice growled. Those around the pair could have sworn they saw sparks flying between their eyes as they came close to drawing their swords again until a noise came over the loudspeakers, signifying that it was 10 o'clock. "Looks like you got lucky, Wargirl," Naruto challenged. "I've got archery next, but we'll settle this during the capture the flag game tonight." "You bet your ass we will." Clarice threw back before the two of them spun around and walked away toward their individual training sessions. She must either really hate him or Clarice has a crush on him, Luke said once both parties were out of earshot. "I've never seen her fight like that against a new blood before." "Really?" Percy asked, getting a nod from Luke. "Yeah, he's got some serious skill with the Xiphos," Luke remarked. "He's got to be a son of Ares or Hephaestus. No way does any other half-blood have that kind of skill come to him so naturally with either a sword or a bow." The rest of the day passed by as normal as any other. Naruto tried to help Percy with his archery, but the only improvement was that his arrows no longer flew into the Dryad's forest, causing them to spurt out curses in ancient Greek. Instead, they tended to fall a few yards in either direction of the intended target. Their winged horseback riding class went superb for Naruto, who was getting used to the way the horse moved as it flew and even allowed him to practice his archery while on horseback. Those results were mixed. More often than not, his arrows hit the target, but none of them came close to a bullseye. During the monster assault techniques training with Hermes' cabin, the pair of them had learned some useful techniques that involved disarming your opponent. Naruto was finding it harder to perform, but he would get it every third or fourth try. Percy, however, had used it successfully on the first time against Luke, but every other time ended in failure. Next up was free period and Naruto opted to join Hephaestus' cabin and made a pair of kopis that were strapped to his hip with the help of Charlie and Tenten. The knives were fairly heavy, but were designed mostly for cutting and thrusting, so they worked well enough. Besides, he'd only need them if someone or something got too close for comfort. However, he would need to train in using them both at the same time if he was going to use them effectively. Later that afternoon, the time came. The Capture the Flag tournament was right now and Tenten and Charlie had just delivered his Hellhound leather armor at the last minute before they had to rejoin their team. As Naruto slipped on the pants and breastplate, he could just feel the work that went into making it. The pauldrons were next followed by the gloves and boots. As soon as he put the leather helmet on his head, a strange feeling came over him. He felt lighter for some reason, like a single step would carry him for miles. Needless to say, his teammates for this match were stunned with the new look. He looked like a ranger from some of the old movies or what they thought one looked like from their Dungeons and Dragons games. Percy was equipped with a bronze helmet and breastplate and given a sword from the armory to give him a fighting chance. If there was any chance that Clarice still held a grudge from Percy soaking them in the toilet water from earlier after they ignored Naruto's warning, now would be your chance to take her revenge. A horn rang across the forest and the game was on. Naruto jumped into the treetops and began to jump from limb to limb with practiced ease. Annabeth already gave him a job to do. Scout from the treetops and keep anyone from the other team from coming close to their flag. As he shot through the treetops, he could see a group of Demeter's children and Apollo's kids coming from the middle. If he had to guess, there were two other groups that were planning on flanking the defenders using a pincer maneuver. Clever, he would admit to himself, but no plan ever survived an encounter with Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto drew 3 arrows and fired them one after the other at the weapons of his targets. All 3 connected with the bows being held by Apollo's sons, sending them deep into the brush and rendering them unusable. He then dropped down from the treetops and held a knife to Katie Gardner's throat. "I do believe I've captured all 6 of you," Naruto said with a grin. All 6 dropped their weapons and raised their hands as Naruto put away his knife. Shikamaru and a few of Athena's children were there to take them to jail. As soon as everyone in the area was gone, Naruto walked over to a tree and proceeded to relax his body. Before he knew what was happening, he sank into the shadow of the tree and began to panic. He closed his eyes, expecting to have been caught by a monster, but when nothing happened, he opened them again. Everything he saw was varying shades of black and white and things seemed to move slower than they normally did. He looked down to his hands and saw nothing but the darkest black he'd ever seen. His skin, his armor, even his bronze weapons were all black as night. He went to take a step and felt himself move almost instantly to the shadow of a connecting tree. The more he moved, the more he began to enjoy being like this. He had to come up with something to describe this. "Shadow form," he said, before shock entered his body. His voice was incredibly deep. Deeper than even Chiron's voice or Mr. D's voice. Whoa, creepy voice. Alright, I can deal with that. Let's see what else shadow form can do. With that said, he proceeded to shadow run from shadow to shadow toward the direction Percy was at. As he neared the place Percy was at, He could see Percy had sustained a few cuts from the weapons of the Ares kids, including Clarice. However, it wasn't long before Luke had snuck by everyone and grabbed the flag, winning the game for the blue team. Percy stepped into the water of the running creek, guided by Annabeth, and felt his wounds knitting together and his exhaustion seemingly vanished. However, the festivities didn't last long as a hellhound, from out of nowhere, proceeded to pounce in Percy's direction. Naruto jumped out of the shadows. "No," he cried before drawing his bow, creating an arrow of light, and firing it at the airborne hellhound, which vanished into a golden dust. Everyone just looked at Percy and Naruto with wide eyes. Chiron walked out into the clearing and coughed into his hands. "It has been determined," Chiron spoke. "My father," Percy and Naruto asked questioningly, earning a nod from Chiron. "Poseidon, Earthshaker, Stormbringer, father of horses," Chiron said neutrally. "Hail, Perseus Jackson, son of the sea god. Apollo, healer, oracle, grand musician, and sun guider. Hail, Naruto Uzumaki, son of the sun god and great-grandson of the sea god." By the gods, the two heard Annabeth Chase whisper to herself as she stumbled back slightly at the revelation. "I didn't think. I thought it would be Zeus." Even Clarice was too shocked for words, as were the sons of Apollo. One of their brothers had somehow attained their father's fabled photokinesis, something none of them had believed to ever be possible. It didn't take long before Mr. Diaz entered the forest and heaved a mighty sigh. "Of all of the demigods who had to come to camp this year, why did it have to be you two?" Naruto's eye twitched somewhat violently. "I'm sorry. Did someone just say they wanted an arrow of piercing hot light shot through their immortal skull?" Whether Mr. D paid any attention to the threat wasn't clear to anybody as he just turned pointedly toward Percy. "There are a lot of people who want you dead right now. However, you are still needed, so I doubt any of those people will be willing to kill you just yet. At least, not until you've done your job. Both of you, follow me to the big house." Everyone around them had an idea what was going on except them, and that definitely annoyed them both. For now, they could only follow Mr. D to the big house and hope to figure out just what the hell was going on. Up on Olympus, the gods and goddesses were having another meeting. Or rather, that's what it was supposed to be. Sadly, it quickly devolved into a shouting match between Poseidon and Zeus. During this argument, Apollo was having the time of his life, bragging to Artemis that one of his demigod children finally managed to inherit his photokinesis. "For the last time, Apollo," she said firmly to her younger brother. "I don't care if one of your sons has inherited anything from you." "But Artie," whined Aphrodite as she looked through the hearth to see the replay of the capture the flag match. "He's so handsome. Definitely has his father's good looks." "I know," Apollo said with a glowing grin. "He's just like a chip off the old block." "Who was his mother?" Aphrodite asked curiously. Apollo approached the hearth and waved his hand, conjuring an image of Kushina Uzumaki. "She really is an amazing woman," he said softly, remembering all of the time he spent with her. At first, she was just going to be another mother to one of his children, but as time went on, for once, he truly believed he found a woman he actually wanted to be with. It didn't matter that she was a legacy of Poseidon. Don't get him wrong. He loved the mothers of all of his children just as much as he loved his children, but Kushina was different. Aphrodite cooed at the look on Apollo's face as he looked at Naruto's mother. She wasn't ashamed to admit that the fiery redhead was beautiful and those violet eyes were so exotic. It was a shock and a shame that she wasn't one of her children. "You really got lucky with her, Apollo," she said mirthfully. "So when's the wedding?" "Wedding," he shouted with wide eyes. "There's no wedding. Come now, Apollo," Hera stated as she approached the group. She looked at the image of Kushina in the flames. "It's clear to all of us that you have deep-running feelings for this woman. And I, for one, wholeheartedly approve of her. You need someone like her to keep you in line." "Hera," Apollo shouted indignantly. "Artie, help me out here." "I don't know," Artemis said. "If she could stop you from being so lazy, I don't think I'd mind having a sister-in-law." "Not you too." The other gods and goddesses who weren't occupied by Zeus and Poseidon's argument all laughed at Apollo until the ground beneath their feet began to shake and Hades appeared in a grand pillar of darkness and marched toward Apollo before grabbing him by the collar. "How?" he demanded harshly with narrowed eyes. "How did your son manage to enter my realm, Apollo?" "He what?" Apollo asked, genuine in his confusion. "Somehow, during the capture the flag game, Your son managed to enter the Shadow Realm, Hades growled. I demand to know how he did it. By this time, it wasn't Apollo who said anything, but Hephaestus. The giant god of the forge gave off a loud chuckle before approaching Hades. You mean, you don't know? Naruto Uzumaki came up with, if you ask me, a brilliant idea. Those two hellhounds that attacked him in the factory he ended up blowing sky high. The trophy that came from them was some hellhound hide leather. He asked my little girl, Tenten, to make him a set of armor out of it. He what? Shouted a number of gods and goddesses. I thought it was genius, Hephaestus added. My best guess is that the hellhound's ability to move through the Shadow Realm was infused into the armor they made him. To turn trophies into weapons and armor. I'm almost ashamed that I hadn't thought of it first. That's my son, cried Apollo, tears streaming down his face in pride. I'm so proud. I demand that you destroy that armor, Hades ordered Hephaestus. It unfairly allows anyone to cross into my realm. No, Hephaestus said clearly. No, Hades asked, his ire rising with each passing moment. No, Hephaestus repeated. It was his trophy to do with as he pleased. He earned that trophy. If he decided to turn the trophy into armor or a pair of boots and a purse, anything made from his trophies should be considered trophies as well, and the gods and goddesses are forbidden from taking trophies from demigods unless it is offered to us as dictated by ancient law. Hades was furious. He was the god of the underworld. The Shadow Realm fell into his domain. No demigod should even be allowed to cross into it save for any that he sired. He turned to glare at Hephaestus and Apollo before disappearing in another pillar of darkness. This is not over yet. I will have that armor and see it destroyed. Apollo looked up to the smith god and gave him a smile. Thank you, Hef, for standing up for my son. Bah, the smith said. Tenten and Charlie worked hard on that armor. Your son has nothing to do with it. I just won't see something my kids worked hard to make be taken away by Hades' temper tantrum. Let's just hope that nothing bad will come of this, Hera said. She'd, surprisingly, begun to take an interest in young Naruto. He found the last living legacy of the Tumesian fox and it became his pet. He was incredibly cunning, strong, and loyal to his friends. And now she finds out that it was his idea to have his trophies crafted into weapons and armor that could possibly inherit an aspect of the creature it was made from. He was definitely one demigod to look out for. Back at Camp Half-Blood. It hadn't been long since the capture the flag match when he and Percy had been claimed by their parents and great-grandfather, in Naruto's case. The two followed Chiron and Mr. D to the big house where they were guided up to the attic. Percy, Naruto, what you're about to see might be a bit strange, but I want you both to listen carefully to what is said. I thought nobody lived up here, Percy injected, causing Mr. D to snort. I suppose that would be correct for the most part, Mr. D said. But that would largely depend on your definition of live. Zombie, Naruto asked sarcastically. Mummy? Some other member of the living dead category waiting to murder us once we get up there? Mr. D smirked. Something like that. Naruto just gave him a blank look, much like Percy was. The two sighed, looked to one another, and played a game of rock, paper, scissors. Needless to say, Percy lost by picking rock to go up against Naruto's paper. Before he went up to the attic, Percy turned to look at Naruto. You're really willing to send me up first just in case some kind of murderous zombie is waiting to kill us, he asked. Naruto shrugged. Well, if you do die, I'll know not to go up there and Zeus will be satisfied enough to call off the storms and whatnot. So it's kind of a win-win situation. You go up and die, Zeus is happy and hell on earth is avoided. You live and I don't have to tell your girlfriend you died a horrible, painful death at the hands of some undead monster. Mr. D did something nobody thought he would ever be caught dead doing. He was laughing, though it sounded slightly more maniacal than what they initially believed. You're definitely a bright kid, Narumi. Maybe you're not so bad. Mr. D looked at the watch on his wrist. Well, it looks like I'm off to the emergency meeting, Chiron. If Barnacle Beard's son is still here when I get back, I'll turn him into an Atlantic bottlenose and make sure he ends up in an aquarium. Do you understand? Chiron sighed and nodded while Percy looked on the verge of panic and worry. And Perseus Jackson, if you're all that smart, you'll see that that's a more sensible choice than what Chiron's going to ask you to do. Mr. D pulled out a playing card before twisting it oddly, causing it to turn into a secutary card before disappearing in a purple mist that reeked of wine. What did he mean by, if I'm still here, Chiron? Percy asked. For the first time in several years, Percy, I'm giving out a quest, Chiron explained. To be more precise, I'm giving you a quest. Will you accept it? The two friends looked at one another. If only Percy is getting a quest, why did Mr. D want me here too? Most likely because he suspects that Lord Poseidon's claiming both of you meant he wanted you to help Percy on his quest. What's the quest about? Percy asked. That's the hard part, Chiron said hesitantly as he looked into the sky at the growing weather disaster overhead. Zeus and Poseidon, Percy clarified. They're fighting over something. Something valuable. Something stolen, right? Chiron sighed. That's true. You see, Zeus believes that you, Percy, stole his master bolt, his symbol of power. Why would he think that? Naruto asked. Because several years ago, Zeus, Hades, and Poseidon agreed to not have any more children after World War II when their children waged war on one another, resulting in many deaths. Obviously, before the war ended and before they made the agreement on the river Styx, Lord Poseidon had one last half-blood child. Your grandmother, Lady Mito Uzumaki, Naruto. Obviously, your claiming means Poseidon broke his oath, Percy, and it's because of this that Zeus believes you stole his master bolt. But that makes so little sense, Naruto argued. Percy never knew his father. Never met him, yet Zeus is blaming his missing bolt on him? It's bullshit. The sky roared with thunder, causing Naruto to look up at it with narrowed eyes. Just because you don't like it doesn't mean I'm wrong. Lord Zeus doesn't think rationally in situations like these, Naruto, Chiron admitted while trying to avoid getting blasted by the furious sky god. Several hundred years ago, Lady Hera sought the help of all of the gods and goddesses to try and make Lord Zeus a better ruler by trapping him in a golden net. Since then, he has become slightly paranoid about the other gods trying to take over. None more so than Poseidon. So it isn't a far stretch of the imagination to believe that Poseidon had his son steal the master bolt so that he could become ruler of Olympus. Damn it, Naruto muttered. And with two forces of nature fighting one another, the other gods and goddesses would be forced to take sides. The world would be caught in the chaos. Nature at war with itself. Destruction. Carnage. Millions of innocent people dead because of random earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, thunderstorms, and other natural disasters. And you, Percy Jackson, would be the first to feel Zeus' wrath, Chiron stated. And I had to find his stupid master bolt and bring it back to Zeus, Percy stated with a growl, his irritation quite palpable. What better peace offering than having the son of Poseidon return it to him, Naruto said harshly. So if Poseidon doesn't have the bolt, then where is it? Percy asked. I think I know, Chiron stated. Some years ago, I got a prophecy and some of the lines are beginning to make sense. Before we can move any further though, you have to do one thing before you can take on this quest. What's that? Percy asked. Chiron sighed. It's time for you to consult the oracle. Is that why we're here? To meet with this oracle, Naruto asked. Chiron nodded. So where are they? In the attic, Chiron stated. Every so often, a clear-sighted mortal is born that Lord Apollo, your father, gifts with the ability to give prophecies. However, this time is different. The oracle died, but her power never passed on to another. Nobody knows what happened, not even Lord Apollo himself. Whenever someone else has been given the power over prophecy, they either died or went mad. So, the oracle, even though she has most definitely passed away, her mummified body has been kept in the attic of the big house. When a quest is given, green smoke billows out from her and she will give out a prophecy in conjunction with a quest. However, this quest has a time limit. You must get the bolt back to Zeus by the summer solstice. You do realize that's in 10 days, right Chiron? Naruto asked, getting a slightly depressed nod from the centaur trainer. Naruto nodded to himself. Okay, so we've got 10 days to save the world. No pressure. Right, Percy? Yeah, Percy said, drawing it out a bit. I think you should take this quest, Naruto. Naruto looked at Percy with a flat glare. I'm sorry. I thought I just kicked your butt in rock, paper, scissors to see who goes up there or not. That was when we thought Mr. D was leading us to a zombie or something that would kill whoever went up there, Percy argued. What would Annabeth think when I tell her you chickened out on seeing a mummified corpse that could have helped you save the world, Naruto said. Girls don't like wimps and cowards, Percy. For the last time, Annabeth's not my girlfriend, Percy shouted. The Nile isn't just a river in Africa, Percy, Naruto taunted, causing Percy to fume. Regardless, I'm not the one Zeus is pissed off at, even if he's only pissed off at you for no real reason aside from your dad breaking his oath. The fact of the matter is, if I return the bolt, Zeus still believes Poseidon stole it with your help. If you return the bolt, he feels justified and vindicated. Not to mention, if you do find out who stole the master bolt, you can throw it in Zeus' face when you return it to him. Of course, you might want to consider sticking close to Poseidon when you do choose to do that just so he doesn't blast you straight to Hades. Percy frowned. As much as I would like to disagree with Naruto, he is right about this matter, Percy, Chiron replied. Zeus' pride can only be satisfied by having the supposed culprit return the stolen bolt personally. How many people can join me on the quest? Percy asked. Typically, only 3 campers are allowed on a quest, but there have been instances when more have been required to accomplish a more difficult quest, and I have very little doubt that this quest, considering the limitations, would be one such quest, Chiron informed the duo. Percy sighed and nodded before heading up to the attic where he would meet with the oracle. Wish me luck, he said before disappearing from sight. This quest isn't going to be easy, Naruto said as he relaxed into a nearby chair, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Percy and I haven't been here very long and barely got any real training in. I understand your frustration, Naruto, Chiron stated. Believe me, if the deadline wasn't so close, I'd rather keep you here to train more before sending you off on your own. Rarely does it bode well for untrained demigods to go on a quest. Naruto nodded. Why couldn't this have happened next year? You know, once they got a good bit of training in, it was beyond frustrating. They hadn't even been able to set foot into their respective cabins, though Naruto was honestly considering bunking with Percy since his stepbrothers and stepsisters looked to be more numerous than even he believed, and he doubted his father or great-grandfather would mind him staying in either cabin. I think right now, I'm going to head outside, Naruto said. You know, get a breath of fresh air before Zeus decides to kill off most of humanity because someone stole his master bolt. I'll call you back when Percy gets done with the oracle, Chiron stated before Naruto walked outside where he was confronted by Clarice, Grover, and Annabeth. He remained quiet as he looked at the group with a single eyebrow raised. Clarice decided to break the silence. So what did Mr. D and Chiron want with you two? She asked. Oh, you know, Naruto started. Zeus and Poseidon are fighting over who took the master bolt. Percy has 10 days to get a group together to retrieve the master bolt and save the world from a horrible, bloody demise. The usual crap demigods like us had to deal with. The 3 looked at him with mouths agape. You mean to tell me that Percy is getting a quest? He just got here. Yes, and Zeus is blaming Poseidon for the theft of the master bolt, Naruto said. And considering the oath the big 3 took after WW2 and that Poseidon broke it by having Percy, Zeus wants Percy to deliver the bolt to him by the summer solstice or we'll have a literal hell on earth scenario going on. So he's with the oracle now getting his prophecy, Annabeth asked, though the way it came out, it sounded more like a statement. Naruto nodded. What about you? Are you going with him on the quest? Honestly, I don't know, Annabeth, Naruto said. Personally, I am beginning to wish that Zeus and Poseidon would be willing to hold out on this damned war against one another for another year so that Percy and I could get more training. Realistically, I've got a feeling that he'll ask me to join him, but I don't know if I'll accept or not. Even without as much training as most of the other campers here, you're already a strong demigod, Naruto, Grover said as he chewed nervously on a tin can. If anyone can help Percy survive his first quest, it's definitely you. Yeah, Clarice said, I didn't think you'd be a son of Apollo of all things. I honestly thought you would have been a son of Hephaestus or one of my siblings considering your strength. Naruto smirked at Clarice. Wait, didn't Apollo beat Ares in a boxing match during the first Olympic Games, Clarice, he teased. I mean, that would explain why I beat you in that sword fight earlier. Ha, she laughed. You still think you won that? It's obvious I drew first blood. Besides, Apollo got lucky beating Ares in that boxing match. Just because my dad got lucky doesn't mean I did, Naruto said as he butt heads with Clarice again. I could beat you in any kind of contest you could dream of, Wargirl. Is that a challenge, Sunshine? Clarice called, her hand inching closer to the sword on her hip. You bet it is, Naruto said, narrowing his blue eyes as he looked into her brown eyes. His hands twitched closer to his own sword and the two were moments away from clashing blades with one another when Chiron came out saying that Percy had finally come down. "You got so lucky Chiron came out here or I'd wipe the floor with you, Wargirl." "Maybe in your dreams, sunshine," Clarice taunted before turning back to her cabin, but stopped for a moment. "You better not die on this quest. We still have to find out who the better swordswoman is." "Come on, Wargirl," Naruto said with a cocky smirk. "This is me we're talking about. I can't die yet, not with this challenge hanging over my head." "Just don't die," Clarice said as she waved him off. "When you get back, I'll have a list of challenges for you so we can finally settle who's stronger." As Naruto walked into the big house, he left behind him a stunned Annabeth and Grover. Annabeth looked at Grover, whose jaw was firmly dug into the floor. Who was that and what did she do with the real Clarice? She asked her satyr friend who was trying to figure out what was going on just as much as she was. As the two got over their shock, they decided to join Naruto and Percy in the big house. "So what's the deal, Percy?" Naruto asked. "The oracle said I would head west and face the god who has turned," Percy replied, much like he did when Chiron asked him. "I'll also find what was stolen and see it safely returned." "Okay, so we managed to save the world. Good job everyone," Naruto said with a smile. "Did she say anything else?" Percy hesitated before shaking his head negative. Naruto narrowed his eyes. He knew Percy was omitting things from them, but he wasn't going to press him on it until it placed them in danger. "Well, I don't know about you, but I'm going," Annabeth stated firmly, much to Chiron's chagrin. "This is my chance to go on a quest and I'm not about to let you get in my way, Seawed Brain. Besides, you need someone smart to round out your group." "I'll go too," Grover inserted. "If I can help make sure you survive on your first big quest, I'll be able to get my searcher's license for sure." "What about you, Naru?" Percy asked. "Will you help me out on this quest?" Naruto closed his eyes. If I didn't go, Claire Eyes would never let me live it down and she'd have something to hold over my head. No way will I pass that up. So I guess that means everyone for the quest has been selected," Chiron stated. "Rest up today. Tomorrow morning, you'll begin your journey." With those last words uttered, Percy, Naruto, Annabeth, and Grover all went to their respective cabins, homes to rest up. Tomorrow was the beginning of the longest days of their lives. The next morning, Percy and Naruto woke up in Poseidon's cabin, something the son of Poseidon was thankful for by allowing his best friend to sleep there too. However, he couldn't get much sleep due to a combination of the odd dream he had involving an eagle, which he thought he remembered as Zeus' sacred animal, fighting a horse, an animal that represented his father. They both ate in silence during breakfast, something shared with the other campers. Apparently, some of the dryads had overheard about the two newly claimed demigods were getting a quest to find the Master Bolt and proceeded to tell everyone in the camp. Of course, with Aphrodite's daughters being the gossip queens they were, it wasn't long before everyone knew what was going on. Once breakfast was over, Grover, Percy, Annabeth, and Naruto were out front by Argus, the 100-eyed security guard of Camp Half-Blood, and Chiron. Just as they were about to board the white van, a voice calls out to them. "Wait up," called the familiar voice of Luke Castellan as he jogged up to the group. Annabeth blushed slightly. Once Luke was there, he took a moment to catch his breath. "Since this is your first quest, Percy, I wanted to give you a gift." He pulled out a pair of Converse sneakers. "Just wait, Maya." Suddenly, a pair of wings sprouted from the ankles of the sneakers. "My father, Hermes, gave me these shoes when we visited the gods and goddesses during the winter solstice. I never use them, so I figure they might help you on your quest." "Thanks, Luke," Percy said with a smile. "It would probably be in your best wishes that you wouldn't be the one wearing those shoes, Percy," Chiron said. "Having the target of his ire flying around in his domain is just as good as painting a target on your back." With those words of wisdom, Percy reluctantly agreed and passed the shoes to Grover. "Hold your horses," called several other people. Before long, the group was joined by Clarice, Tenton, and Lee all came running to the white van. Thanks to their intense training, Tenton and Clarice looked far less winded than Luke and Lee did. "Naruto, my brothers and I wanted to give you something special for your first quest," Tenton stated. "Yeah," Lee said with a glowing grin. "We've all actually got some things to give you. And, to wish you luck on your quest." "Speaking of gifts," Clarice said as she reached for her back pocket. When she pulled her hand out, She tossed a piece of black cloth in her hand before tossing it to Naruto. When Naruto unfolded the cloth, he saw a bronze plate with Apollo's symbol on it. Clarice then reached into her front pocket and pulled out a similar item with the symbol of Ares on it. She wrapped her own band on her arm where Naruto managed to cut her during practice, something Naruto noticed and did the same. I made these personally. You're the only person in camp who can give me a real challenge and the first to draw blood during our spar. It's a symbol of my respect for you as a warrior. Thanks, Clarice, Naruto said in genuine happiness. It means a lot to me. Clarice turned slightly, a light blush appearing on her cheeks. Whatever. Just don't forget. We've still got a score to settle when you get back, sunshine. Naruto smirked and extended his fist, which Clarice bumped with her own fist with a smirk of her own. Count on it, wargirl. Now that one gift's out of the way, Tenten said, a bit miffed with Clarice's gift to Naruto. This is from Hephaestus' cabin. She handed him a black leather pouch with bronze throwing knives inside. The knives will automatically return to the pouch if they go farther than 50 feet away from it. Sweet, Naruto said as he took one of the knives and launched it at the tree 30 feet away, piercing his intended target with a fair amount of accuracy. He walked away 20 feet further and watched as the knife seemed to disappear. When he checked the pouch again, all 5 knives were there. I feel like a card-carrying badass. Thanks, Tenten. And let's not forget about your brother from another mother, Lee Fletcher stated with a chuckle, causing many there to groan at the overused joke. I might not have some badass set of knives for you like Tenten or an awesome armband like Clarice, but the guys at the cabin figured you could use these. He handed Naruto a pair of Oakley sunglasses. Naruto slipped them on and looked around. What do they do? He asked. Aside from shielding your eyes from Dad's chariot, mostly just make you look like an even bigger badass, Lee admitted. Hey, not all of us can make something useful. Sometimes it's the most underestimated things in your inventory that can prove the most useful. Wow, Lee, Tenten admitted. That actually sounded kinda cool for a moment. She walked over to Naruto and whispered in his ear while Lee was busy trying to look cooler. After the quest, bring those shades to my cabin and we'll find some way to make them more useful. Naruto subtly nodded before sending Lee a warm smile. Thanks for the present, Lee. Tell the others I appreciate it. Lee gave Naruto's fist a bump as did Tenten. As Naruto, Percy, Annabeth, and Grover boarded the white van, the remaining campers made their way out, though some were noticeably missing. All of Aphrodite's daughters were at the front, waving to them. Kurama, who Naruto had spoken to prior to Lights Out, was with Selena Beauregard, daughter of Aphrodite, who helped teach both him and Percy how to ride a Pegasus. Hephaestus' cabin was launching fireworks into the sky, writing, "Good luck with the quest for the Master Bolt," in brilliant flames and explosions. Only a small handful of Ares' sons had even shown up, though that was most likely because Clarice threatened them if they didn't show. Demeter's children were still in the strawberry fields, so it wasn't unexpected that they wouldn't show up. Hermes' cabin, both the claimed and the unclaimed demigods, were out there wishing them a fond farewell also. Apollo's sons and daughters were shooting arrows into the air. Thankfully, none of them struck the van and most landed in an unoccupied part of the forest around camp. Percy, this sword will also help you on your quest, Chiron said before handing him the pen that he used to defeat the Kindly One. Its name is Anaklumos, Riptide, in the common tongue. It was once used by Hercules before it was given to your father. And now, your father has given it to me to give to you when you were ready. Percy nodded, giving his thanks to Chiron before finally boarding the van. As they said their farewells, Argus took off down the path until he hit the highway and began to drive toward western Long Island. In Chicago. It was a somewhat beautiful day in Chicago, Illinois. The partially cloudy sky was obstructing enough of the sun that its rays weren't as annoying as they usually were. Especially for a pair of young teenage boys walking down the street. One of them had short cropped black hair with a natural deep bronze tan skin tone. He had eyes as cold and gray as gunmetal and the build of a professional football player, standing easily at 5 feet 11 inches tall. He wore a black sleeveless shirt with a violet fleur-de-lis on the right pectoral under a violet jacket and black gloves that covered his hands. He wore a simple pair of black pants and black combat boots. On his hips were a pair of Colt 1911 pistols. One was an ivory color while the other was jet black. Beside him was a slightly taller man with a similar build, but not as bulky. He had an Asian skin tone with black hair and dark-tinted sunglasses covering his eyes. He wore a white button-down shirt with the top 3 buttons undone, showing off his muscular chest, and a black jacket with a violet fleur-de-lis on the right-hand side of the jacket. He had on a pair of black cargo pants and matching combat boots to his friend. The Asian man looked incredibly pissed off, and it showed in his aggressive gait. The man beside him understood completely. After all, it wasn't often that you had to bury your girlfriend less than a week ago. Aisha had been an up-and-coming singer. She was the girl that grew up in a shitty neighborhood and still managed to do something good for herself by becoming an R&B singer under the Kingdom Come record label until she discovered that the biz wasn't as glamorous as she believed. Extortion? Manipulation? You name it, she had witnessed it. They faked her death and blew up a Kingdom Come record building using a car loaded with C4, and she had been living with Johnny Gat, her boyfriend, since then. However, when a rival gang caught wind of her, they captured her and lured Johnny into a trap. Before she had been ruthlessly decapitated, she warned Johnny and Colt, his best friend and leader of the gang he was a part of. Together, they killed the leader of the gang known as the Ronin, but Johnny had been critically wounded. Once the bloodshed was over, they had planned a secret funeral for their best friend, lover. They buried her under the church that they had been using as their headquarters. Johnny, the bronze-skinned youth, started. "I'm sorry we couldn't save her." Johnny sighed and looked over to his friend and leader. "Relax, boss," Johnny began. "If we hadn't been seen dumping that Ronin's body, she'd still be alive. If anyone is to blame, it's those Ronin, which isn't a problem anymore, and that snitch who sold us out." Colt narrowed his eyes as he pulled out a journal that belonged to the leader of the Ronins. "Yeah, the Uchiha Corporation, a subgroup of the Ultor Corporation, whose business plan focused on genetic cloning and manipulation according to Kinsey. One of their guys gave that bastard the info on Aisha. Some prick named Fugaku Uchiha is the guy in charge and snitched to the Ronin about her. We're about to piss off a multi-billion-dollar corporation," Johnny said. Colt smirked. "Yep, we'll have a well-armed private army after us," Gat reinforced with a similar smirk on his lips. "Yep, we'll be outnumbered 100 to 1 more than likely." Colt turned to Johnny. "What are you afraid of, Johnny?" he asked. "It's just another Tuesday. It's like you read my mind, brother," Gat said as he wrapped an arm around his friend. As the duo stood outside of the rundown church, a young girl wearing a crimson cloak with a hood ran up and landed a glomp on Colt. The mammoth man didn't budge, but wrapped her in a hug. He held her away from him and looked her up and down. She was 12 years old with silver eyes and black hair with crimson streaks through it. She had a brilliant smile that lit up her face. Colt set her down and began to use his hands to sign to her. "Hello to you too, Ruby Rose," he said via his voice and his hand signs. Ruby Rose, his adopted sister and the adopted sister of his entire gang, was mute and deaf, but she was so full of life and an endless supply of love for her brothers and sisters that she had become a source of motivation for them. She brought beauty into the world by growing flowers and selling them. A small portion was given to her as an allowance while the rest, the group insisted, was split between the gang and her business of selling her flowers. Where they brought bloodshed, she brought beauty. She gave life while they took it. Colt found it rather poetic. She flashed back with her own signs, which made Naruto smile more. "I had fun, big brother," she signed. "Kinsey helped me with my homework and Shandi beat up Pierce." Colt laughed, causing Johnny to look at him before relaying the message, getting even the hardened gangster to laugh, ruffling Ruby's hair. "Pierce just doesn't know when to give up, does he?" Gat asked his friend. Colt shook his head negative. "You'd think he would after she nearly castrated him the last time he tried to be smooth with her," Colt added. He turned back to Ruby and began to sign back to her. "Go tell everyone we've got plans to make. We're about to get some really rich people mad at us." She nodded and ran through the church, allowing the 2 older teens to follow slowly behind. As they walked through the church, they saw several people wearing various styles of clothes with a purple fleur-de-lis on it somewhere. When they spotted Colt and Gat, they all raised a hand, waving at them. "Hey, boss. Welcome home, boss. How's it hanging, boss?" Colt and Gat smiled. These were their friends, their homies, their family. Many years ago, Colt had stumbled across Johnny Gat after some punk thought they could try and lay their hands on Ruby as a little girl. He killed the son of a bitch. Johnny was impressed and invited him to hang out with other kids like them. When he joined them, the 3rd Street Saints, they were about making the streets safe from these thugs ruining their city. Julius was the boss at the time. After he betrayed the Saints, resulting in Colt killing him and becoming the boss of the Saints. After he became the boss, he looked to Ruby Rose and knew what he wanted the 3rd Street Saints to do. The Saints wouldn't be there just to clean up the streets. They would be a family for the misunderstood and misfits. They would make the city a better place for children to live. Eliminate the crime-soaked streets. Make Chicago a place where people feel safe and can go out and do what they wanted to do. It was why Aisha was such an integral part of the Saints and why her death was such a heavy blow to them. The two continued to move deeper into the church only to stand in front of 2 women and a black guy around their age, with the tallest woman in the middle having a hand on the shoulder of Ruby Rose. She was a Caucasian woman with long brown hair done up in a ponytail with a single bang hanging over her left eye. Her eyes were a beautiful hazel color that seemed to change colors every time she blinked. She had a slender, feminine body shape. She wore a purple crop top that was a lighter shade of purple than that of many of the other members, that exposes her midriff under a black, short-sleeved leather jacket that also exposes her midriff, skin-tight purple latex pants, and black belt-buckled high-heeled boots. She was flashing him a charming smile. The other woman was a Caucasian woman with crimson hair, freckles, and analyzing gray eyes. While she has an average build compared to the other woman's feminine build, she made up for it with her genius-level IQ. Her current attire consists of her FBI jacket, a gift from her father when he actually paid attention to her before abandoning her for his job, a purple hoodie, torn-up light denim skinny jeans, black boots, fingerless combat gloves and glasses. She was agoraphobic, but they were steadily working on helping her with it since she joined the Saints. She was focusing on a small tablet in her hands, her fingers a flash of skin as they danced across the screen. The lone male of the trio was an African-American teen. He wore a gray driving hat, a dark purple shirt under a buttoned-up gray sports jacket with a gold chain with a huge fleur-de-lis on it dangling from his neck, matching gray slacks, and black dress shoes. He had a cocky smirk in his face as he drinks from a canned energy drink. "Hey, guys," Colt said with a raised eyebrow. Shaundi, Kinsey, and Pierce never intercepted them before unless there was bad news. "What's up?" "Not much, boss," Pierce replied smoothly. "Heard you and Gat went to Junichi's pad? Find anything interesting?" "You mean other than a bloodbath?" Gat said sarcastically as Colt pulled out the book he had shown Johnny earlier and tossed it to Kinsey. "Go to page 24. Third paragraph," Colt stated. She turned to the page and read what he had asked her to. Her gray eyes widened and she looked up to him in shock. "Are you serious?" she asked. "The Uchiha Corporation?" "Yeah, Kinsey. Specifically, Fugaku Uchiha was the one who gave them the green light to kidnap Aisha," Colt informed the trio. "Me and Gat have a plan." "Gat and I," Kinsey corrected. He gave a flat look to her. "What? You know how I get when you use improper grammar. She's got you by the balls, man," Gat replied. Colt gave him a scathing look that only made Gat laugh harder. "You had better be thankful that my sis is here or you'd be getting an earful right now," Colt warned before sighing. "Just go to your crib, Gat. I'll call you when we're ready to take the fight to the Uchiha Corporation and Ultor." Yeah, I got it," Gat said as he started to leave the church with his hands held up like he was giving up. Shaundi looked down at Ruby with a smile while signing. "Go to bed, squirt. Pierce will go with you to tuck you in." Ruby looked toward Pierce with eyes filled with joy. Pierce sighed before taking the girl by the hand and bringing her to her room in the church, leaving Shaundi and Kinsey alone with Colt. All around them, the other gang members saw what was happening and, wishing not to go another round one-on-one with Johnny Gat as punishment as some already had, chose wisely to leave the church to their own pads where they had bought and renovated old rundown homes. The only people in the church were Shaundi, Kinsey, and Colt. Colt looked around, finally noticing that the building was empty before looking at the 2 women. "So, what's up, ladies?" he asked curiously. Shaundi sighed before walking up to him and delivering an unexpected kiss directly to his lips. He quickly fell into it before they separated almost 10 minutes later. Kinsey groaned in annoyance. Shaundi looked at her with a cocky smirk. "You had your nose in that tablet, Kinsey, so I had to take the initiative. Only because I found something interesting about the Uchiha Corporation," Kinsey rebuffed with puffed-out cheeks that had been tinted pink at the sight of Colt making out with Shandi before she shrugged her shoulders. It didn't matter, she thought to herself. She would get what she wanted. She usually did. Their security system is top-of-the-line stuff. Motion sensors, hidden cameras, turrets, you name it, they likely have one better installed throughout the building. Stripper pole, Colt asked sarcastically, causing Kinsey to pause. 15 on the break room on the top floor and 5 more every floor below that, she replied flatly, causing Colt to whistle. No wonder the employees never want to quit their job, Colt said, impressed with the Uchiha Corporation aside from the fact that they are the ones who got Aisha killed. That's another thing, she began again. Knowing that they primarily deal in genetic manipulation, it wouldn't be a far stretch of the imagination to consider that they use clones as security. In fact, their entire staff might be nothing but clones bred for either intelligence and/or combat prowess. I wonder, what would things be like if there was more of me and Gat in the world? Colt asked as if actually considering the idea of cloning him and his best friend. Never, Kinsey and Shandi said flatly with a shudder. The world can barely handle one of you both as it stands, Kinsey stated. With more of you, even just one more, the world would be thrown into chaos and endless bloodshed. You make it sound like a bad thing, Colt replied. Kinsey sighed before grabbing Colt forcibly by the collar and dragging him back to his room with Shandi following behind with a knowing grin. Good thing they soundproofed his room. In Ruby's garden paradise, where the young girls slept, because things were going to get hot and loud. Just the way she liked it. Meanwhile, after a long ride in the van that brought them to New Jersey. As they approached a bus station, an odd-looking woman caught their eye. Hey, brats, she called out to them from her spot leaning against a wall between the restrooms. She had jet black hair and crimson eyes. She was average height for a woman in her mid to late 30s. She scowled at the 4 youths and for a moment, Naruto could see a bit of Sasuke in her, but Annabeth could have sworn she saw Ares. Get over here. The 4 debated about going to the strange woman, but reluctantly agreed to do so, if only because they still had a fair bit of time until the due date of their doomsday quest. Hold your horses, lady, Naruto said to the scowling woman. Geez, people can be so pushy these days. I'd watch your tone, brat of Apollo, she warned. It isn't smart to piss off a goddess. Naruto and Percy narrowed their eyes. So my hunch was right, he whispered. What hunch? Percy asked. She's Sasuke mom, Naruto warned, causing their eyes to widen. The goddess smirked arrogantly. It seems like one of you has something in those hollow heads of yours other than dust, she said before scowling. But I don't want you to say that thing's name in front of me. If you do, well, I am the goddess of revenge. What do you want us for, Lady Nemesis? Annabeth asked politely. It isn't often that a goddess of your station graces mortals with your presence. Ha, Nemesis laughed. A kid of Athena's showing me respect. This day just keeps getting better and better. She sighed to herself, basking in the respect given to her by the 2 demigods. I think I like you too, but I suppose I can't hold you back from your quest for much longer, can I? Don't want Lord Zeus or Lord Poseidon to come looking for me for interfering in such an important quest. So, I'm willing to offer you some help, but one of you must come with me on their own quest. Separated. So soon, Annabeth hissed to herself. She knew it was bound to happen, but not so soon after beginning their quest. Naruto seemed to understand the situation also, as did Percy and Grover. He smirked at his friends, giving them a thumbs up, before turning back to Nemesis. So you're my ride to Chicago, huh? He asked, shocking her with his question. It was part of the prophecy given to Percy. Those damned fates, she muttered angrily before spitting out toward a trio of buses as a 4th one pulled into the lot. Yeah, I guess I am, but even though this quest isn't from some major god or goddess, it's just as important as a quest given directly from the mummified lips of the oracle herself. Got it? We're clear, Nemesis, Naruto said firmly. Good, she said before turning to the remaining 3. Since Sunshine's boy is coming with me, I guess I can help you out in your quest. Get on the bus that just pulled into the terminal. It will take you to St. Louis, Missouri. From there, you gotta figure it out on your own. Why can't we go on those first 3 buses? Percy asked the goddess, causing her to groan. By Olympus, you are clearly your father's son, she said to herself. Even an idiot like you should know that when I do something, I do it for a reason. If you three are as smart as Athena's girl or Apollo's kid, you'll find that you'll live longer if you do what I say." Percy was about to speak up, but Annabeth and Grover quickly clapped a hand over his mouth. "Thank you for this assistance, Lady Nemesis," Annabeth said hastily before dragging Percy to the fourth bus and boarding it quickly, leaving Nemesis and Naruto to their own devices. "So, brat," Nemesis began without looking at her companion. "How much do you know about this quest I'm giving you?" "Not much," he replied. "Just that I was going to be separated from my group to the city in flames, aka Chicago, and that you'll tell me a tale of someone who has wronged you." "Wronged me?" she spat angrily. "He didn't wrong me. He used me and that thing you call Sasuke Uchiha as the byproduct." "So how are we going to get to Chicago?" he asked. A feeling deep in his gut was screaming that this would be a long story. Nemesis unleashed a loud whistle and a motorcycle with a sidecar appeared. It looked rough. Harley Davidson, custom, but definitely saw better days. The headlights were crimson and the body was black with spots where peeling paint showed the aluminum body. "Like this," she replied before hopping on the seat, making Naruto get into the rusty sidecar. It wasn't long before the motorcycle shot off with a loud roar. Naruto was forced deeper into his seat as they shot down the highway. "So, let's get to the meat and potatoes of this." Hecate ran into a guy named Fugaku Uchiha, the head of the Uchiha Corporation, a subgroup of the Ultor Corporation. She fucked him and popped out a brat of her own by the name of Itachi Uchiha. Fugaku did a few tests on Itachi's blood and somehow got word that Hecate was a goddess. Well, he wasn't satisfied with one half-blood brat. So he found me. Somehow, he found out that I was a goddess like Hecate and he fucking drugged me, she shouted. "Normally, your mortal drugs don't even do shit to me unless I wanted to, but this one managed to bypass my defenses and knocked me flat on my ass. Next thing I know, I'm strapped to a table and that bastard was harvesting my ichor and my eggs. Mine, but he slipped up. He forgot to drug me again and I got in touch with Hecate's brat, Itachi. I gave him a quest. Claimed or not, he was still a demigod and he accepted. So I told him to kill Fugaku and burn the Uchiha Corporation to the ground. Erase any sign of my existence and destroy any records related to demigods and the Olympians." "Did he?" Naruto asked as they zoomed through Michigan. Nemesis narrowed her eyes. "Yeah, but that bastard Fugaku was crafty," she admitted. "He cloned himself and copied all of his notes and took a few samples before leaving. Itachi killed Fugaku and destroyed the notes, but things were already set into motion. Before long, I had realized that he used one of the many eggs he harvested to give birth to that test tube abomination you know as Sasuke Uchiha. I didn't claim him. He was forcibly claimed and I know one person who could do that. A threat greater than any demigod has ever faced. One that even I am hesitant to side against. And that is Kronos, the father of the first Olympians, Titan King, and Crooked One," she warned. "Only someone with the anatomy of an Olympian god or goddess could devise a drug that can render one unconscious to the world." "But why would he help a human?" Naruto asked. "He finds humans disgusting abominations and would never willingly lay with them, but with Fugaku's help, they found a way to create artificial demigods. Or in his case, demititans. With an army of them that would obey his will alone and the return of the Titans, he may very well be able to topple Olympus and none, not even Lord Zeus, would be able to defy him." "And this quest of yours?" Naruto asked. He already felt like he was up shit creek without a paddle. "Why not learn how to swim?" "Fugaku believes that he has avoided me and my wrath," she declared. "Much like Lord Hades, I can hold grudges for a long time and the hatred I bear for him is rivaled only by my hatred of the Olympians for seeing us minor gods and goddesses as inferior. If you succeed, I will help in whatever way I can to fight alongside the Olympians, but only if they will acknowledge us minor deities as equals and not mere servants. Now, your quest is similar to the one I gave Itachi," she reminded him. "You will find his research and evidence of the existence of the Olympians and destroy it. All of it. Secondly, you will kill Fugaku Uchiha. Permanently. Then, instead of burning the building, I want it erased from existence. Leveled. Obliterated. Demolished. Destroyed. I want it gone." Naruto nodded. Before he knew what was happening, the motorcycle stopped in front of O'Hare National Airport. "This is your stop, kid," she said as he quickly got out of the motorized death trap. "Remember, I'm watching you, kid. Don't disappoint me. Before he knew it, Nemesis shot away, leaving a trail of dust behind until she vanished from sight. Great, Naruto moaned as he pulled out his cell phone and looked to see that he had no signal. Perfect. No way to get in touch with Percy or Grover. He looked around for someone, anyone, to get directions from. The sooner he did this, the sooner he could rejoin Percy and warn everyone about what was coming. He spotted a tall, older Asian teen with black hair walking down the street and prayed his luck would hold up. Yo, big guy, he shouted as he ran toward the guy, who turned toward him. For a moment, he could have sworn he saw a guy like this in Hephaestus' cabin. What do you want, kid? He asked. Thank you, he muttered silently to the gods. I'm new to town and a couple of my friends said I should visit the Uchiha Corporation's headquarters while I was in town. Mind giving me directions? For an instant, he could have sworn he saw the massive man's eyes narrow through his sunglasses and his stance became aggressive. Really? He asked sarcastically. And these friends of yours are from New York. They came on a field trip and wouldn't shut up about how amazing the building was and whatnot. Said I had to see it for myself. Percy Jackson and Annabeth Chase. That's cool, the man said. He pulled his cell out and proceeded to dial. Hey, boss. I found some kid looking for the Uchiha Corporation headquarters. He's from the Big Apple and said a couple of friends of his told him he had to visit it after they came from a field trip. The man nodded as the person on the other end responded. Gotcha. Meet you in a few. Before he could say anything else, a group of hellhounds sprang up around them. Each one looked rather fierce in its own right. Actually, we might be delayed for a minute. Following the arrival of the hellhounds came the towering form of the Minotaur that Naruto remembered slaying. Make that 2 minutes. Naruto pulled out his bronze rod before summoning its bow form with a squeeze of his hand while the older man pulled out a shotgun. Naruto looked at him skeptically. I don't think that's gonna work here, the young boy warned. The man gave a chuckle. It's worked for me before. Why should now be different? He looked at the bow in Naruto's hands. Think that twig launcher will do anything? Naruto smirked before knocking an arrow and aiming it at the Minotaur before releasing it. The arrow glowed a golden hue before piercing the shoulder of the giant monster through and through. That was a warning shot. Still confident that your compensator can handle these things? The man gave a wicked grin. I think we're gonna get along just fine, kid. The name's Naruto. Naruto Uzumaki. Not kid, Naruto said. Johnny Gat. He fired a blast from his shotgun at a hellhound that lunged at him, blowing it away into golden dust, leaving behind a fang. And this ain't compensation. After all, with an 8-inch, what's there to compensate for? With that said, the pair unleashed hell upon the poor bastards that dared to attack them. One by one, the hellhounds were quickly dealt with, each one leaving behind a fang or a claw as its trophy until the only ones left were Gat, Naruto, and the Minotaur. Looks like we're tied up, Naruto mentioned. Yep, Gat replied with a. The one who kills the walking T-bone gets bragging rights, Naruto challenged. Yep, your bloodlust is showing, Naruto fired. Yep, Gat replied as he shot off toward the Minotaur, ready to shotgun blast it in the face, but was surprised when he heard an empty click result. Well, shit. The Minotaur swept his arm in arc, sending Gat sprawling across the ground where Naruto was waiting. See, Naruto mocked. I told you your bloodlust was showing. Eat a shrimp, Gat said before he tossed aside his empty shotgun and pulled out a pistol and aiming it at the Minotaur. Where the hell did you pull that from? Naruto asked in morbid curiosity. I'll tell you when you're older, Gat explained before unleashing several .45 caliber rounds through the monster's chest, causing it to stumble backward while Naruto readied an arrow before launching it at the Minotaur. With the bullets staggering it, it was unprepared for the arrow that lodged itself in its nuts. The monster unleashed a high-pitched cry before a bullet to the fave put it out of his misery. You missed, shrimp, Gat said as he slowly eased off of his battle high. Naruto smirked and pointed to the trophy, which was a bull's nutsack. To the victor goes the spoils, he mocked. And I never miss, Gat. Then I am going to enjoy this more than I was about to after that, he said before slugging Naruto in the jaw, knocking him out before slinging him over his shoulder and heading back to the church. The boss wanted to talk to this kid after he dropped the Uchiha Corporation name. Who was he to disappoint? He looked down at the bull sack left behind and snorted before filling it with the teeth and nails of those black dogs. As soon as Johnny Gat had brought Naruto to the church the 3rd Street Saints used as a headquarters, Ruby Rose, Shandi, Kinsey, and Colt were walking up to them. He smirked when he noticed the glow and slight limp Shandi and Kinsey had. "I got the kid right here," he told Colt as he shifted the weight of the youth on his shoulder again. "We ran into those weird dog things and a man-bull thing, but the kid wasn't bad in a fight." He pulled out the bronze bow that the kid had used to fight and tossed it to Colt, who inspected it. "He has a bunch of arrows made of the same stuff as his twig thrower." Colt looked mildly interested as he inspected the bow thoroughly. "Not bad," he muttered to himself. "It's well designed and well balanced. Made of the same stuff as our ammo. I don't think I'd be able to do nearly as good of a job as the person who made this." "Very impressive work." Colt looked up at Gat. "He have any other weapons?" Gat scoffed. "In that fanny pack of his?" Gat asked. "No way." Colt nodded to his best friend as Shandi decided to speak up. "So what are we gonna do with him, boss?" she asked with a smirk as she looked the kid over a couple of times. "A bit too young to believe he's connected to the Uchiha Corporation. Not to mention he's a real cutie." "He lied to Johnny," Kinsey said flatly with narrowed gray eyes. "The Uchiha Corporation doesn't do field trips. They don't even let the media do interviews in or around the building. Odds are too high that someone would notice their security measures and question what they were doing. He wanted something from them, but we won't know until we interrogate him." "Kinsey," Gat barked slightly angrily. "He's around the same age as Ruby. Would you interrogate her if she was in his shoes?" "That is totally different, Gat," she defended, raising her voice slightly. "We know Ruby. This kid came armed from New York with the intent of visiting the people we were planning on assaulting. He doesn't need to get caught up in our mess," Gat replied heatedly. "That's enough," Colt ordered, getting his girlfriend, lover and best friend to stand down. "We won't be interrogating him, but we will ask him questions. Make him comfortable before he wakes up. He may tell us more that way than if we tie him to a chair and interrogate him like some of the guys from the other gangs. Got it?" Gat smirked at Kinsey, causing her to level an intimidating glare his way, before taking Naruto deeper inside the church to a bed where he could rest from his surprise nap. "Are you sure we shouldn't at least tie him up?" Kinsey asked. "Make sure he doesn't have any more weapons on him?" Colt looked at Kinsey with a grin. "Kinsey, I thought you had enough fun tying me up a couple of hours ago while you and Shandi took turns. Don't tell me you already want to do those dirty things to a kid, using the excuse to search him for weapons to pop his cherry, as a reason to do it." Kinsey's glare made even the hardened boss flinch as a ferocious blush spread across her cheeks. "Just for that, I'm changing the safe word and you won't know it." She turned to storm off toward her fortress of solitude, as many of the gang often called it, and do more research. Colt looked down at the bronze bow in his hands and knew just who to take it to. A few minutes of walking and Colt was standing in front of a store called Friendly Fire. It was a gun store, but the owner sometimes let him have a few sheets of raw bronze to use in his projects that he'd buy at a relatively cheap price. He pushed upended the door and standing at the counter was a man with a long black beard and eyes as dark as coal. His skin bore a healthy tan, but appeared weathered with age. He was technically and legally disabled, but that didn't stop the man from selling his supplies and services to the public. The bell chimed and the aged man looked up, his hardened gaze softening a bit as he recognized his favorite customer. "Hey, Colt," the man said, his voice rough and gravelly to the young teen's ear, but held with it a warmth that always seemed directed his way. "What brings ya here, boy? I thought you already bought enough bronze for you and your friends." Colt displayed the bow, setting it on the counter. The man's hawk-like gaze landed on it and recognition seemed to waver in his eyes. "A kid Gat found was carrying this," he said. "It's made of the same bronze you sell me. I thought you might be able to provide me with some answers." The man grunted, taking the bow in hand and running the calloused fingers across it gently before drawing the string as far back as he could. "So, Apollo's son is already here," he whispered inaudibly to himself before returning his attention back to Cole. "It's an amazing bow, not cheaply built like most of the crap you see in those composite bows. The draw is easily 100 pounds. Your kid has to be strong. About how old do you think he is?" 12, Colt replied. The man hummed to himself. "Very strong. Most kids his age can barely draw 50. It was built for a marksman who can fire while riding a mount, typically a horse. He took very good care of it, almost bordering obsessive, to keep it in such pristine condition. It must be special to him. I guess, Colt replied with a shrug of his shoulders. I've never seen another weapon made with this kind of bronze before. Of course you haven't, boy, the man said gruffly. This kind of bronze is harder to come by than any other. Most people don't want to use it in favor of metals like steel, titanium, and iron, but only a select few people are capable of bringing out the potential in this bronze. You and I, my boy, are only two such people. His fingers caresses the bow softly as if listening to it sing for him. This kind of metal has a unique personality and, when put in the hands of a skilled artist, it sings a beautiful symphony and anything is possible. It can be formed into bullets, swords, spears, statues, tools, and other beautiful crafts. But in the hands of an ordinary person, it cries, begging for its suffering to cease. In such a pitiful state, nothing could be formed, and anything formed by it appears disgusting and foul. Useless to anyone. So can you tell me where he got it from? Colt asked. Or even who made the bow? The man shook his head negative. Sorry, but it's virtually impossible. Colt signed in resignation before taking the bow back. Thanks anyway, Pops, he called before leaving the building. I'll see you sometime next week for my resupply. The man waved farewell to Colt as he left the building. Once the coast was clear, the man walked over to the door and flipped the sign to read closed before heading deep into his workshop in the back. He approached a wall where he had a few pictures. One stood out among the rest. It was a couple of pictures involving a dark-haired woman, built like a tomboy, wearing a brown shirt under a pair of filthy overalls covered in grease. Beside her was a younger version of him, grinning and wearing similar attire to the woman. Behind them was an old Ford 1967 Mustang that they had been working on. The next photo was a bit harder to look at. Laying on a table was a boy, no older than 8 at the time. He had dark hair like his father, but his right arm and left leg were missing entirely. The picture after showed a boy in a similar state with bronze replacement limbs capable of functioning like the real thing. I'm sorry, Colt, the man said, a single tear leaving the corner of his eye. You almost died protecting Zeus' daughter, and this is the only thing I can do for you. Damned oath. Damned ancient laws. Still, you have made me proud to call you my son. The man seemingly combusted into a pillar of flames before they disappeared, leaving only light scorch marks on the concrete beneath his feet. Back at the church, Naruto was coming back and his vision began to even back out. Memories of what had happened flooded his mind and he swore he would kick that asshole Gat into the next time he saw him. Once he had regained his bearings, he saw that he was alone in a rather Spartan room without much decoration. Before he knew what was happening, he got some kind of odd message. A rainbow appeared in front of his eyes and the image of Percy, Annabeth, and Grover were standing side by side. Ruto, Percy cried, smiling widely at his friend. Perce, Naruto asked. He yawned before looking around for eavesdroppers who might be listening in. Where are you guys? And how are you talking to me? Las Vegas, Annabeth mentioned. And this is an iris message, a method demigods use to keep in contact with one another. Where have you been? We couldn't contact you for hours. I got my quest from Nemesis, and when I was asking for directions, we got attacked by a huge pack of hellhounds and the Minotaur. But you killed it, Percy mentioned. Shouldn't he stay dead? Under normal circumstances, they would. But Hades uses the monsters as his own personal army of torturers and tormentors, Annabeth explained. Monsters don't have souls, so they can't die for good if you kill them. You just have to hope that when you put them down, they don't reorganize themselves for a few months to maybe a few years. Yeah, Naruto responded. Well, the guy the first was with helped me out by shotgun blasting a few hellhounds back to Hades. But mortal weapons can't hurt monsters, Annabeth stated. Suddenly, she had a moment of clarity. But guns aren't the deadly part of the guns normal people use. It's the bullet. If the bullet is cast from celestial bronze, that could explain why it managed to kill a monster. So I'm dealing with demigods, Naruto muttered to himself. Perfect. I have the best fucking luck. So what kind of quest did Nemesis give you? Percy asked. Naruto growled. Well, she told me how a mortal had managed to drug her, kidnap her against her will, and harvested her ichor and eggs after he had discovered about the gods when his eldest son was born to him through Hecate. He owns the Uchiha Corporation. Using the things he had at his disposal, he managed to have a second child through Nemesis by using his sperm and her harvested eggs. Guess who? Sasuke, the trio said in shock. Yeah, he's an artificial demigod, Naruto noted. So she gave his eldest son a quest. Kill his father and destroy evidence that would prove that the gods were real. Unknowingly, he killed a clone of his father and destroyed only a few samples that Fugaku had left behind on purpose to trick Nemesis. Annabeth looked absolutely livid. For a mortal to defy the gods and harvest a goddess, no matter how minor, of her ichor and other parts of her. So now, she wants me to kill him and destroy the Uchiha Corporation building, he ended. Make sure that all of the evidence of the existence of the Olympians is kept secret and away from mortal eyes. But he's human, Percy objected. You can't just murder him like that. He doesn't have much of a choice, seaweed brain, she spat. This man has made himself an enemy of the gods, and to go against a quest given by a goddess isn't smart, but celestial bronze can't hurt morals. Only monsters. I wonder whether one of my light arrows could do anything to him, he said as he conjured an arrow of light in his hand. Maybe, Percy said hesitantly. You remember what happened to Boba Fett at the museum, right? Naruto nodded. Yeah, that might not be a bad idea. If our powers activated out of anger toward Boba Fett and managed to affect her, maybe our powers can work on mortals. Speaking of quests, how is your quest going? So far, so good, Grover mentioned. Apparently, those buses Lady Nemesis spat on had a major accident. Nobody was killed, but the 3 teachers aboard had been badly hurt. I think they may have been monsters, but I can't be sure. Naruto nodded. Alright, guys, Naruto said. I'll catch you later. And Percy? Yeah, Percy responded. Don't do anything stupid. Percy glared at him before the iris message cut out. Naruto sighed to himself. At least they're safe, he whispered to himself as he looked around. Which is more than I can say for myself at the moment. Meanwhile, in another room, Gat, Shandi, Kinsey, and Colt were looking on as the event played out. For a moment, they were questioning the kid's sanity, as well as their own, since they clearly saw the same thing he had. I gotta ask, did we just see the same thing? Gat asked his homies. Kinsey rolled her eyes at the question, though a part of her was curious. Gods? Demigods? Quests? Monsters? If they weren't all legitimately insane and everything they heard was the truth, then it would explain a lot about everything they had been through and attributed to bad luck. And that symbol on his armband. She knew she had seen something similar to it before. As her fingers danced across the keyboard of her computer, she pulled up a Wikipedia page that answered some questions, but only brought up more. If what I'm seeing now and what he said was true, then I think I have an idea as to part of his identity, she responded. Everyone looked to her for answers. I believe that he's talking about Greek mythology, and the gods he's referring to are the Olympians. And that armband might mark him as a son of Apollo, which would explain his choice in weapons. Apollo was a master archer, as was his older sister, Artemis. Okay, Colt said, say I believe you, which I am really hesitant to do right now. That would make him a demigod. And if the Olympian gods and goddesses still exist, then there might be more where he came from. Right? Basically, she replied. That also begs the question, what did he mean by celestial bronze? His bow and arrows, Colt said. They're made of the same stuff I make our ammo with. I asked the old man at Friendly Fire about his bow, and the only important detail he said was that it wasn't any ordinary bronze and that only people like us could use it properly. Kinsey and Shandi looked at their boss in concern. I can barely remember anything before I was 12. No parents. Nothing except really strange dreams that barely make sense most of the time. And now you're 16 with 2 girlfriends who love you more than anything, a psychotic best friend, at this. Gat gave a crooked grin. A beautiful little sister, and a family of misfits and orphans who look up to and respect you, Shandi said as she walked over to wrap her arms around his waist. Kinsey, Gat, and Pierce were all smiling at their boss. Yeah, life sucked. All of them could attest to that, but if they could change it all, they wouldn't. So what are we gonna do with the kid, boss? Pierce asked. Colt untangled himself from Shandi's slender and sensual arms before moving to the door. While I'm not sure if I believe him about the Olympian gods existing and this quest of his, he does have some skill with his bow, and he made that arrow of light. We might need his help, and I doubt he's gonna just go home and let us deal with the Uchiha Corporation. Kid's strong, Gat said. Seeing him in action against those monsters, if I didn't have you guys, I don't think I'd mind having him watch my back. A compliment like that from Johnny Gat was not that easy to come by or willingly given. Then I guess I better go over there and ask if he'd be willing to help us out. A few moments later, Colt opened the door and was surprised when a celestial, bronze-throwing knife came inches from his ear, burying itself into the cement wall. He looked toward Naruto with a raised eyebrow. Really, he asked sarcastically. Remind me to have Gat make sure he removes all of your weapons next time. Remind me to kick that in the next time, Naruto replied smartly as he rubbed his sore jaw. Damn, if Clarice ever catches word that I got sucker punched and captured on my first quest, I'll never live it down. Girlfriend, Colt asked. Friend, Naruto said with a glare. We just met less than 2 weeks ago and we got into a fight. After that, we just sort of became friends. Sounds like me and Gat, Colt said with a chuckle. Good times. Anyway, we heard that conversation you were having with your friends. Naruto looked ready to make a smart-ass comment until Colt motioned to the camera in the corner hidden by shadows. So, is any of it true? Naruto nodded. Of course. I'm still new to the whole, my dad's an Olympian god and I'm training to be a hero, shtick. But after all of the things I've seen so far, I don't have much reason to doubt it. I guess, the older teen said. Listen, me and my friends have some business with Fugaku Uchiha and his corporation. I figure, since you have this quest or whatnot to deal with him, you might be inclined to help us out. If I wasn't so sure you were, I'd more than likely laugh in your face, call you insane, and deal with it on my own, Naruto said. After I escaped, of course. And how would you escape, Colt said. I'm curious. I'd kick you in the nuts, run downstairs, kick Gat in the nuts twice, then run out the front door while screaming my lungs out about rapists, pedophiles, and crazy people hiding in the church, he said as if he had all the confidence in the world. Why twice? Once for sucker punching me. A second time just because I don't like him, he replied. So what's your deal with Fugaku Uchiha? Colt's cocky smirk turned serious. He got Gat's girlfriend killed a week ago, he responded, causing Naruto to look stony. Maybe I'll just kick him in the nuts once, Naruto thought out loud. Bastard's already been kicked there by Fugaku, I guess. So, you're going to help? Colt asked, getting a nod from Naruto. I don't have much of a choice, he said. Either go with you and get something done. Or leave and do it on my own. Likely to my untimely death at the hands of an enemy I know next to nothing about. Now, all we need is a plan, Colt muttered to himself. A plan? Okay, plan A. We bust in there, kill anything that gets in our way, kill Fugaku, then blow the hell out of the building. Plan B. We sneak in and do the same shit we were planning on doing in Plan A when we get busted because one of you will have an itchy trigger finger. Good plans, kid. I like the way you think, Colt laughed as he took Naruto to meet his homies. Tomorrow. All hell is let loose and Fugaku will die.
That's all for now. If you want to see next part, then please like this video and subscribe my channel. Thank you.